their domestic industries. A report by the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank suggests that both tariffs and non-tariff measures, such as local content requirements, have negatively impacted investment in vital infrastructure. Local content requirements can also push up the price of renewable energy prices or leave them undersubscribed. It can also prevent better products or solutions from entering the market. Trade and trade policies then will be a key catalyst for production and export at scale. Let's be clear, there is also another benefit. As we confront mounting geopolitical uncertainty, the ability to move alternative fuel sources from nation to nation and from region to region can enable us to sidestep the energy crisis that impacted global markets in the last 5 years and keep our industries running, our costs stable, and inflation under control. Ladies and gentlemen, trade is also key to distributing the products that can drive the energy transition, such as solar panels, wind turbines, and many EV batteries. Trade in renewable energy system and components grow more than fourfold between 2000 and 2021, and developing economies accounted for more than 55% of that growth. Kenyan farmers, for instance, now benefit from solar-powered water pumps designed in Britain, tested in Nepal, and manufactured in India. The result is a greener product entering the supply chain and incentivizing better environmental management. This is a clear case of supply chains supporting both energy transition and economic development. Trade policies must enable more of it, but legacy subsidies and tariffs threaten to stifle the growth of sustainable products or materials that support their manufacturing. We recognize that the multilateral solution takes time, but here in the UAE, we're moving forward with our trade partners to improve the exchange of green goods and services. We're already exploring a sustainable economic corridor with the Netherlands that will enable the trade of green hydrogen, and our comprehensive economic partnership agreement, which puts priority on tariff-free trade, are now helping to connect emerging nations in Asia and Africa with developed markets in Europe via the UAE. They're also streamlining custom procedures and reducing regulatory bottlenecks. We are also facilitating FDI knowledge sharing in renewables, advanced manufacturing, and agri-tech. Just over a year ago, I attended the inauguration of the landmark Sirata floating solar projects in Indonesia, a joint venture between Masdar and the National Energy Company of Indonesia, one of our first SEPA partners. And as our SEPA network grows, we can expect similar projects to extend to every continent. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very convinced that the energy transition is within reach. We have the means, the technologies, and the demand. But we must collectively recognize the role of trade in driving the required change. This is not something any nation can achieve on its own, but whether through global bodies or bilateral deals, the UAE will continue to exert our influence to try to deliver it. I invite others to join us and deliver an energy system geared towards the economy of tomorrow. I wish you a very pleasant day. Thank you.
Many thanks, Your Excellency. Esteemed guests, it's now time to welcome my next guest, His Excellency Majid Al Suwaidi, Chief Executive Officer at Altera, as we're going to delve together into how to bridge the gap between vision and reality to transform Global South investment. Your Excellency, please come and join me here on stage, and please join me in extending a very warm welcome to our guests. Thank you. Welcome, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for joining us. Please take your seats. Thank you. So, Altera is a private climate investment vehicle committed to investing $30 billion US, and that's to unlock $250 billion US in impactful climate investments by 2030. So very ambitious targets Indeed, and your focus is on transforming emerging economies and markets. And it's also important to point out that the fund is the world's largest private climate investment vehicle, and it was announced at COP28 by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed. So first of all, Your Excellency, why the gap in financing? What are the key risks investors perceive still, and that deter them from financing infrastructure projects in emerging markets? How can the risks be effectively mitigated? And what innovative finance or financing mechanisms could address that gap?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you. And as you know, I was Director General for COP28 and worked very closely with Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, our COP President. And we were fortunate to deliver a very successful outcome. And a big part of that was the launch of Altera. And why was it that we felt that this was a very important contribution? And that was because as we traveled around the world speaking to different stakeholders, governments, different entities, we understood very clearly, and we saw this in COP29, that the big gap when it came to climate and investing in climate was the capital. And you've heard Dr. Sultan many times talking about making capital more available, accessible, and affordable. And when we traveled around, we tried to understand, well, where was the problem? Because when we spoke to people from finance, they said, well, we have lots of capital, but there are no projects to invest in. And then when we spoke to project developers on the ground, particularly in the Global South, they're like, we've got tons of projects, but there's no capital to come behind it. And I think that what we saw was that there was a mismatch there, and that this was something that we as the UAE were in a unique position to do. And thanks to the guidance and vision of our President, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, who we can't underestimate how much of a leader he has been when it comes to these matters, really has been investing in climate and investing in the transformation for years. We have Masdar today, one of the largest renewable energy companies in an oil and gas producing country because of the vision of His Highness. And so investing in climate and the transition to a cleaner world has been something that our government and our leadership have been focused on for many, many years. We know that there are real challenges out there that need to be overcome. And Altera doesn't solve for all of those problems. It's not a silver bullet that will resolve everything because the problem is bigger than that. But it helps to address that issue of mobilizing capital. And how does it do that? We do that in a very, very unique way. We know that there are traditional finance houses out there that are providing capital. And what we did was, through our 30 billion fund, we have two funds, transformation and acceleration. Transformation is 5 billion in catalytic capital that is focused for the Global South. And acceleration is 25 billion of catalytic capital that acts globally. Through these two funds, we can work in unique ways. We've invested across 7 strategies with 3 partners, Brookfield, TPG, and BlackRock. And most excitingly, with 3 strategies that are focused on the Global South. Brookfield and TPG, we've seeded 2 Global South funds. We have had phenomenal response from this sector in that they've been able to raise between 4 and 9 times that capital. And by the way, when we started, we were told we could get maybe 1 or 2 times our capital mobilized. So we're well on track to achieving our 250 billion mobilization target that we've set. And I think that Altera is really groundbreaking in the industry, and over the last year we've heard time and time again about how we're really transforming this industry and how we think about investing in climate and how we think about investing in the Global South.
What you have highlighted here is the paradox of the transition. There is capital, there is willingness, but we need to do that matchmaking in order to direct it in the right place and use those innovative financial instruments indeed. Since COP28, what's happened at Altera? Tell us about the key milestones maybe that you have reached since and what your targets and the ways to get to your ambitious targets by 2030 are.
Well, as I said, we've been very successful. A lot of people don't think that we're only a year old because we've been so active and so people have gotten used to hearing the name Altera in the conversation. But we're still only a baby organization. We're a startup in many ways, and we're learning as we go along. We have, like I said, 6.5 billion of our capital committed. That's 20% of our capital. We have 1.5 of our 5 billion that's for the Global South committed through these funds. We're well on track to achieving our goal of 250 billion. I'm supremely confident today that we're going to get there. And what we're seeing now is that the industry is coming behind us, and so they're putting their hard capital into these funds that we've created with our partners. Now we need to see that being deployed on the ground. By the way, we already today see investments happening on the ground, and we have some exciting investments coming up in the coming months, so please stay tuned and look out for some of the investments that we're going to be making that are going to have a significant effect on how we invest in the Global South. But I think that we are laser focused on what is our mission. Our mission is to show that investing in climate, investing in the Global South, investing in resilience, investing in a new form of finance is the future. And that's what I think is exciting about Altera, is that we are building the future. We're investing in a new way of doing business, and I think that that's very, very exciting.
We can definitely sense a lot of excitement. To wrap up this conversation, I'd like to ask you, as a new year's underway, what your big wish for 2025 is?
I think that as we go into 2025, we know we face a lot of challenges. You heard in Dr. Sultan's speech at the opening ceremony about this huge demand in energy that is going to be coming globally, and a big part of that is in the Global South. How are we thinking innovatively and creatively about how we get the capital quickly and to people globally to address this energy gap that is out there? And that's a great opportunity, by the way. And how do we do that at scale in the Global South? And I think that in 2025, we can really make great strides in addressing that challenge.
Lots to look forward to. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. That was a great thought on the potential out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. What a great conversation indeed. Staying with the theme of finance, essential of course in this transition, our next panel will consider who leads the charge in financing. And during this discussion, financial powerhouses and global climate leaders will come together to tackle the most pressing challenge of our time. And that's bridging the staggering $5.93 trillion annual climate finance gap. Leading the way into the subject, a special address by His Excellency Badr Jafar, the UAE's Special Envoy for Business and Philanthropy, followed by Kyle Harrison, who will be leading the panel. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get straight to the point. The numbers are big. $6 trillion annually for global climate finance, an annual climate finance gap of over $4.5 trillion, with stark inequities in capital deployment. Such figures will make some despair, but we should not, because we're not talking about trillions in grants or corporate CSR. We're talking about 6 trillion of investments. We're looking at an unmet opportunity of $4.5 trillion. And the world is not short of money. There's more than $120 trillion in assets under management between pension funds and insurance, family offices, and sovereign wealth funds. Worldwide, net private wealth stands at over $450 trillion and is expected to increase more than 6% annually. We don't just have the money, we have the momentum. Barely a year ago at COP28, the UAE delivered transformative outcomes through the UAE consensus. COP29 in Azerbaijan built on these achievements, and COP30 in Brazil will continue to push the world forward. It's increasingly clear that the so-called Global South is leading the charge. China is now thought to have 1,200 gigawatts of installed wind and solar capacity, 5 years ahead of the government's target. In the first quarter of 2024, China installed more solar power generation than the rest of the world combined for the whole year. 3/4 of India's new installed power capacity last year were renewable. In fact, India is moving towards an electrified economy much faster than any nation ever has. Closer to home, the UAE will invest more than $160 billion in global clean energy in the coming years, with a focus on ensuring that these investments promote a just transition, protecting livelihoods and supporting vulnerable communities. You will have heard Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber talk about the launch of ADNOC's XRG, a groundbreaking $80 billion lower carbon energy investment company driven by 3 megatrends: the transformation of energy, exponential growth of AI, and the rise of emerging economies. And of course, as we just heard, Altera plans to invest $30 billion to generate at least $240 billion into smart climate solutions. Indeed, the world's momentum is coming from many serious companies making serious investments. And it should not surprise anybody that the Global South is stepping forward. It is a global powerhouse. It's already home to 85% of the world's population. It already accounts for more than half of global GDP. And by 2030, it's anticipated to account for more than 80% of the world's middle class. So any answer that does not put the Global South, or in other words, the global majority, at the center is no answer at all. So the world has money and momentum, and now we must seize this moment. And to do so, we need a coordinated whole-of-society approach, supported by equitable financing mechanisms that prioritize both environmental and social outcomes. And I believe that the business and philanthropy sectors, in partnership with governments, are the key to unlocking these opportunities. The private sector has always been a driver of innovation. Governments can and must enable this innovation, and philanthropy is the world's hidden catalytic capital superpower. A hint of what's possible came at COP28, during the first ever Business and Philanthropy Climate Forum. At that forum, more than 1,300 private sector leaders from 80 countries, nearly half from the Global South, and 40% of them women, joined forces to deliver $7 billion in new commitments. And I want to emphasize, these were firm commitments to invest in net zero and nature-positive projects designed to deliver market returns. That forum came about because the UAE's leadership has long believed that society moves fastest when it moves as one whole society. The success of the UAE is built on this philosophy. My job as Special Envoy for Business and Philanthropy is to help identify more of these multi-stakeholder opportunities to accelerate collaborative progress. And I wholeheartedly believe that our success as a global society will depend on how well that we embrace this philosophy around the world. So again, we have the money, we have the momentum, and now we must act boldly, working across sectors and across geographies to seize this moment together. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Your Excellency, Badar Jafar, Special Envoy for Business and Philanthropy of the UAE. Hi, everyone. My name is Kyle Harrison, and I lead the environmental markets team within Bloomberg NEF. I'm based in New York. We've got a rock star panel here today to talk about mobilizing capital into the climate transition. Before we kick things off, I wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone in this room. It's been a rocky few years for the sustainable finance market. On one end, right, Bloomberg NEF tracked in 2024 that $1.6 trillion in sustainable debt was issued by companies and countries around the world. That is down from a record in 2021. But on the other end of the spectrum, you saw 500% growth in transition finance, for example, and green bonds actually hit a record volume. You can also move into policy, for example. So you've got 42 markets around the world now that have either implemented or are proposing a sustainable taxonomy, so defining what green and non-green activities are existing in that market. But at the same time, you can turn to the United States, for example, where I'm based, and you've now got 20 US states that have implemented anti-ESG policies. At BNEF, what we're estimating is that for us to go ahead and achieve a well below 2 degrees Celsius trajectory of warming, we need to mobilize $116 trillion into energy supply between now and 2050. And moving forward, right, in 2030, we need for every dollar of that goes into fossil fuels, we need $4 to go into clean energy supply, ramping up to 10-to-1 ratio in 2050. Right now, we are at less than a 1-to-1 ratio, right? So we have a lot of work to do. Today, we're going to talk about how do we get there, right? And what role does the UAE and the Middle East more broadly play in that? So I'm, again, joined by a fantastic panel. To my left, we have Kyung-Ah Park, who runs sustainable investments at Temasek. We have Mercedes Vela Montserrat, who's the Chief Executive Officer at the Global Center for Climate Finance. We have Dr. Mahmoud Mohildin, who is a UN climate envoy. And then we have Mohammed Al-Marzouki, who is the CEO of HSBC UAE. Whew, I'm impressed I memorized all that. So Mercedes, I want to kick things off to you, right? As we see, for example, sustainable debt markets tailing off, as you see investments into, for example, ESG ETFs also plummeting, we need to get innovative when it comes to climate finance, right? We need to unlock new mechanisms, but we also need new markets to get involved. And the UAE, in particular, is positioning itself as a hub for global climate finance. And what role does GCFC play in that?
Thank you very much. Well, the Global Climate Finance Center was launched at COP28 with two main objectives in mind. One, it's about mobilizing capital for climate action, but very importantly, to establish the UAE as a new global climate finance hub, a one-stop shop for climate business. Our journey began with a very strategic question, fundamental question, I would say, from our leadership. How do we make climate finance available, affordable, and accessible? Now, a number of key initiatives, such as Alterra, that was just described by His Excellency Ambassador Majid, already answered that question. But there was a realization for the need to establish a platform that will serve as an accountability platform for some of the COP28 initiatives that were announced, while at the same time establishing the UAE into a new global climate finance hub. So concretely, the way we are promoting innovation and climate finance is by serving as the secretariat of three key initiatives that were launched. The first one is the Global Climate Finance Framework, that was adopted by 15 countries, accounting for 40% of the global GDP. The Africa Green Investment Initiative, a $4.5 billion initiative to be deployed in Africa by 2030. And then Innovate for Climate Tech, which is about focusing on venture capital and startup. At the same time, the center will serve as a platform to provide research, advice on what constitutes fit-for-purpose regulatory frameworks to mobilize capital, and last but not least, as a platform for collaboration between the private, the public, and the philanthropic institutions.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll definitely touch more on the public and private partnerships moving forward. I wanted to kind of piggyback on you mentioned Africa, right, and emerging economies. And I think the big takeaway there is, right, every economy in the world has different challenges when it comes to the climate transition, right? And what we've started to see in some markets around the world is transition finance. For example, in markets like Japan, where you have, for example, a stubbornly cheap coal market, you can use, for example, transition bonds to move us away from coal to natural gas or renewable energy. So Kyung, I want to move over to you and get your take, both from the Temasek perspective on mobilizing this capital, but where do you see transition finance kind of playing a role in this movement?
Yeah, and thank you for having me and Temasek. And for those of you who don't know Temasek, we are a Singapore headquartered global investment firm, and because we are a generational investor, we invest today for the current generation, but also with the future generation in mind. And so sustainability is very much at the core of how we deploy capital, how we integrate it across the investment process, how we engage our portfolio companies, and manage ourselves as an institution. So we certainly invest into the innovative green solutions that we need to scale. But importantly, alongside that, how do we actually transition the incumbent grey industries, many of which actually sit within our portfolio, given that we are a shareholder and investor into companies in airlines, to ports, to energy, and so forth, but also taking targeted investments into the grey to green transition. And that is absolutely critical. And where we can, ideally, increasingly, we are trying to bring the innovative companies with incumbent companies so that the early stage companies can go to market with demand visibility, and then the incumbent companies can actually transition faster and innovate and become more resilient. So really taking a systems approach. And that is important given it is fundamentally about a global economic system transition, and time is obviously very critical. Now, when we think about where we need to head, you quoted some of the statistics up front. I think it's now quite healthy that more and more financiers, investors are leaning in and saying, look, we've got to go where the emissions are and not just the green investments. But to do that, you need a rigorous framework to say, what does good transition really look like in order for us to make sure we don't have unintended consequences of locking in infrastructure that can last decades and actually make us more carbon intensive. So I think that is absolutely critical, and there's a fair number of transition finance frameworks and so forth, but we need some harmonization around that, but it's not a one-size-fits-all. Coming back to your point around coal, when you think about emerging markets and developing economies, and particularly in Asia, where we are headquartered, there's new energy that's coming up rapidly, and you're still seeing some of that being met through coal because renewable energy and energy storage is still not readily accessible. And we need to therefore make the new energy definitely cleaner, but there's also a fair number of existing coal that is a very, very young fleet, 15 years or younger. And so that's locked in. So we need to bring the economic incentives in a way whereby we can actually incentivize the decommissioning of that faster. And that's where transition carbon credits can come in. Well-designed frameworks that say if you decommission it faster, replaced with clean, with additionality, without leakage, and certainly with permanence, then let's stack the carbon credits and make sure that we can actually bring the phase out in a much more accelerated way. And so stacking those financial mechanisms is absolutely important, but with clear integrity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we'll have time to touch on it today, but carbon credits will obviously play an essential role in this low carbon transition. Mahmoud, I'm turning over to you now. In your role within the UN, what does a just transition look like for you? And what are your thoughts in the work that you've done on transition finance more specifically?
Right. It's great to be back again here. And fascinating discussions yesterday and today, and building on some of the issues raised before, and the excellent comments by Mercedes and Ms. Park. So let me take it first on this systems approach. If Temasek and the financial institutions are thinking of a system, governments and policymakers should do the same. So the policymakers here shouldn't really be suffering from leakage and gaps. Gaps of data, gaps of knowledge, gaps of finance that may be sometimes bridged by costly debt, or gaps of implementation, because you may have the data and you may have the money, but you don't really have capacity, especially when it comes to localization. If I pick on the particular example of coal and phasing out, that was one of the most important deliverables or announcements, rather, by the Glasgow summit, the COP26. Phasing out coal from South Africa, phasing in renewables, and dealing with the social consequences. If you have a system in place, you need to think exactly in the opposite way in terms of priorities. You need to assess first the social impact, because here we are talking about people who could be impacted, labor opportunity that could be lost, assets that had been associated with them not just by the government or by the state, but the people. And then you consider the phasing in of renewables, because you need really the country to run on something dependable. And then the happy outcome of that will be the natural phasing out. The reason that these kinds of nice approaches didn't really work, despite the fact that the money was there, is basically the policy was not there. The system was not really speaking to each others in terms of components. And in many aspects of the work that we're seeing in the transition, that you cannot really go and challenge some of the values behind it. But when it comes to implementation and operationalization of these values, you do not really see systems of transitions speaking to system of government or budgets, or when you try to translate this at the big year of the indices, the nationally determined contributions, they are not aligned with any of that, not with the budget, not with the rest of the components. So better countries, when they are managed better, they can really get possible partnerships with what is offered in technical assistance and support, or can, in a good day, can have funding either from Temasek or HSBC with less risks than being perceived.
You're doing the moderator job for me. That was a perfect segue into the next segment, right? I think one of the big takeaways for me there is the private sector is essential to this, but the private sector can't do it alone. You need governments and vice versa. Mohammed, turning it over to you, let's talk about public-private partnerships, right? And the role and the experience that HSBC has in that area.
Yeah, thank you for having us here. Well, again, I mean, similar to the other panelists, when it comes to HSBC, we think catalyzing the new economy is vital for transition. Now, when we look at what's happening in the past 3.5 years, there is a great focus when it comes to financing existing solutions. Here I'm referring to solar, wind, batteries, and banks. To be honest, we are very well capitalized to help financing the new technologies as they emerge. The problem is, 35% of the emission reductions that we need to achieve by 2050 will come from technologies that are actually not yet at commercial scale. So there is no problem with the banking sector when it comes to having the capital in place. Again, reference to His Excellency Majid, the previous panel, that is actually the role of Altera. When it comes to a given project here in the UAE, the sovereign is AA rated. If you go at the individual projects, there'll be investor-grade projects. So there is no problem actually attracting FDIs, and the banking sector is there to help. The problem is, when it comes to projects in, say, Central Asia, when it comes to Africa. So a lot of risk need to be bridged by people like, the multilateral development banks and people like Altera, the geopolitical risk, the currency risk, for banks like HSBC and others to come in and help. Now, we've been operating in this country for 70 plus years, right? So we led the private-public sector joint venture for so many years. We started here in Abu Dhabi, so the IWPPs in Abu Dhabi, 9 of them. Actually, we were the sole advisor to government of Abu Dhabi on these IWPPs. What we did, we got international players to come in, so it's a 60-40 JV, and we provided long-term balance sheet, and we continue to do that.
And maybe elaborating more on partnerships, I know HSBC and Temasek have worked together before as well. Kinga, can you elaborate more on some of the climate partnerships that Temasek's been involved with?
Yeah, no, it's really been a privilege to work with HSBC. I mean, this agenda requires us to radically collaborate. Right? I talked about the value chain collaboration earlier. But it's also important to think about the different stages of capital. So we have quite a number of partnerships from kind of early stage with, for example, Breakthrough Energy at the venture. We established a new platform called Decarbonization Partners because there's a missing middle to take proven technology and really radically take it to scale and bring it down the cost curve, called Decarbonization Partners. And in the transition, we have a partnership with Brookfield to really transition incumbent industries. But when we also looked at the market opportunity out there, or the gap, talking about some of the blending that needs to happen and where we need to lean in Southeast Asia, there's many projects that are marginally bankable, where with a bit of elbow grease and some concessional capital that provides some de-risking, very acupuncture de-risking, you could actually finance it with mainstream financiers, investors coming in. So we formed a JV, a 50-50 JV called Pentagreen that is doing sustainable infrastructure debt financing. And it's partnering with the Singapore government on something called the Financing Asia's Transition Partnership, where the government is mobilizing $1 billion of concessional capital with the goal of crowding in and targeting $5 billion. And it's focused on 3 different areas: energy transition, green investment partnership, which is the marginally bankable, and then industrial transformation and decarbonization. And Pentagreen is the manager in that middle, that green investment partnership, to try to get marginally bankable projects to scale. And it's actually very important, and the role of Altera is another good example that was mentioned earlier, where the stacking of capital to try to get more of these technologies that may be proven, but yet because of either FX issues or because of credit risk issues and so forth, with a little bit of, again, elbow grease and that targeted concessional capital, you can unlock a lot more. And that's sort of where the catalytic opportunity is. The last point I'll mention, is in the context of these collaborations. I think a lot of some of the things that you're talking about, where if we can harmonize more, even though I know this world is becoming increasingly more fragmented, capital and technology benefits from scale and liquidity. So the more harmonization we can do around whether it's frameworks, whether it's reporting, whether it's policy, I think the better off we are, because at the end of the day, greenhouse gas emissions is a global problem. It doesn't know any borders. And again, technology and capital benefits from scale and liquidity.
And standardization is essential as well, right? Like making sure all of those frameworks are aligned so that we can make sure that capital flows from A to B effectively.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Kyung-Ah, you mentioned Southeast Asia. I want to turn it back to Mercedes now, and maybe if you could elaborate a little bit more on the work that you're doing in emerging markets. I know you mentioned Africa, but I'm sure there's other regions within the world that you guys are helping to catalyze that climate finance.
Sure. And also, following up on your point around collaboration, perhaps just to give you a bit of background on how we all came about with this whole vision of the Global Climate Finance Center. So we quickly find out during COP28, when we went and spoke to the private leaders, they felt that public institutions were just simply too slow, extremely bureaucratic, and their speed just simply didn't match the speed of commercial transactions. Now, on the other hand, when we spoke to the public leaders, they felt that private financial institutions did not understand the risks, particularly in emerging markets, and therefore, most of the time, they just simply decided to completely ignore this type of opportunity. So it became very clear very quickly that if we were serious, truly serious, around scaling climate finance, we had to focus on collaboration. And that's the whole idea of the Global Climate Finance Center, a platform not to compete, but to collaborate, not to delay, but to deliver. And in order to do so, we're focusing on, and it was also covered by the other speakers, regulatory frameworks, fit-for-purpose regulatory frameworks to mobilize capital, capacity and technical expertise, but also de-risking mechanisms. In terms of Africa and what we do, we like to highlight, and going back to the point around partnerships and the importance of collaboration between the private and the public sector, I think the Africa Green Investment Initiative is a great example. So this was launched during the Africa Climate Week under the leadership of the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs, together with a number of entities here in the UAE, such as, for example, Etihad Credit Insurance,
Mazda, Amia Power, and others, working together hand in hand with Africa 50 on the ground. And again, the aim is to mobilize that 4.5 billion into clean energy projects in Africa by 2030. I think it will be very important going forward. I think there is great amount of work, but it's very much ad hoc and uncoordinated. So instead of just rebuilding or creating something new, let's bring each other's resources together to mobilize the agenda.
Yeah, and Mohammed, what about on HSBC side? What work are you doing to mobilize capital to emerging markets?
Well, GCFC, we are one of the founding partners. Pentagreen, I just wanted to actually comment on that. We are today with Pentagreen, actually we are with Temasek in Cambodia, Thailand, Philippines. If any of those projects were actually presented to any commercial bank where you have to look at the commercial proposal, purely from return perspective and risk perspective, it would have been declined. Actually, wouldn't even reach the credit committee. So it's very, very important actually to have such initiatives in place. Now, when it comes to us here, we have deployed $6.5 billion last year, right? And these are and this is HSBC's balance sheet, and this is 32% higher than the previous year across, various renewable projects. We've also actually led $1.2 billion of various activities in the capital market, whether it's green sukuk, sustainable linked transactions, and we continue to do that.
Great. Mahmoud, we've got a few minutes left here. I wanted to pivot very slightly and ask you about carbon border adjustment mechanisms. I've been in the Middle East for a few days now. That topic continues to come up, and the impact that could have on the Middle East and other markets around the world. What do you expect there?
Right. Three things that will shape the discussion this year, of course, in addition to what we are going to see in Belém and Brazil with the focus on nature and biodiversity as well. But carbon pricing, carbon credit markets, and CBAM. And it looks like one of those old movies when it is with a kind of an acronym that could really frighten someone. But if you are in any of these industries, aluminum, steel, fertilizers, cement, and if you are exporting them and others of other sectors to EU or the UK, you need to be prepared. You have less than 12 months for preparations, and we have only a few seconds to tell you what to do. WTO, you can go and complain. I can tell you, good luck with that, because you have to wait in a long queue until the evidence of harm is established. Then you may have friends in Brussels or London. Go and complain. You will wait on another queue. You may not get an answer, but again, try. There are some people who will claim that they will be helping you. Third, restructure in order to reduce emissions. If it's going to be costly, it's going to accelerate your phasing out plans, you may need to compare the cost of restructuring with the cost that you are going to be paying as fees to Europe or to the EU or the UK, and very soon it might be under a different name with the US. Fourth way to do it is establish some sort of understanding of your more affordable carbon market, could be a regional one or a national one. Fifth one, perhaps you learn something from India by having a good arrangement with the customs authority, pay your authority instead of paying the Europeans or the Brits. The number 6, I would say just pay the fees if it is not going to be that costly to you until you do the further of the restructuring that you do. But again, carbon pricing, carbon credit markets, and CBAMs are going to be dominating many of the discussions. Be prepared for that.
Absolutely. Well, we're unfortunately out of time here. We covered a lot, but if I were to take away kind of one big takeaway from this discussion, we've got 4 or 4.5 really impressive people on stage today, and I think they need all of your help in the audience, right? We can't do this in siloed different wings. We all need to collaborate to ensure that we can mobilize this capital appropriately, and the UAE and the Middle East more broadly is going to play a huge role here. So if everyone could please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and to your esteemed panelists as well, of course. I will now have the pleasure to lead the next conversation with 2 business leaders at the helm of the energy sector's transformation. In this session, we'll explore how we can accelerate large-scale investment in renewable energy to meet ambitious climate targets, whilst ensuring grid stability and maximizing economic benefits. Please join me in welcoming to the stage our speakers, Jim Pagano, CEO of TerraGen, and John Annis, CEO at Pertamina. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon to discuss, of course, your vast experience of the energy transition. So, a bit of background to kickstart this conversation. And we're having it this afternoon because renewable energy capacity is projected to increase by a staggering 2,400 gigawatt by 2027. This growth is, of course, unprecedented, and it requires a careful and, of course, a planned approach, a right strategy to do it properly. So, John, to start with, Indonesia is a very interesting case study. The country is projected to have strong economic growth in the coming years, above 5%, therefore increasing demand for energy. And the potential for renewable energy is estimated above 3.5 gigawatts. So, what do you view as the most effective strategies to accelerate the development of renewable energy in Indonesia, and how do you plan to go about it?
Good afternoon, Charlotte. So first of all, thank you for having me here. It's really an honor for me. So good afternoon, everyone. Yes, first of all, I think the new government, as you know, is projecting is even higher growth. So just now we are talking about 5.5, but the government is targeting 8%. So to achieve this growth, of course, we need energy. Otherwise, we cannot achieve it. And nowadays, when we talk about energy, we cannot, quote unquote, not to think about renewable. So that's the reason why recently the government already projected 100 gigawatt additional power within 15 years to come, out of which 75% will come from renewable. So now we are talking about 75 gigawatt of renewable capacity from now on the 15 years to come. So it's massive, requirement and massive, I would say, target from the government. So how to achieve it? So of course, today the usage of renewable is relatively low. It's about 19% of renewable in the energy mix in Indonesia. However, the potential is quite huge. So we have more than around 3,700 gigawatt of renewable from various resources, including solar, geothermal, and everything. So we need to unlock this potential, of course. So first of all, there is a regulation to handle that. So I think the government is working very hard to make the regulation is more attractive for the investment, as well as to lighten the permitting, all the requirement to build the renewable, so to make it faster. So there are a lot of things that government also trying to help us in terms of financing, not directly with them, but to facilitate with the financial institute, as well as to push us to find the good partner on the technology, because when we are talking about renewable, we need the technology, right? So now, as a Pertamina, we are part of the state-owned enterprise. So we need to support the government target first for the growth, plus also the target of the renewable, as well as the net zero emission. As you know, Indonesia is targeting 2060 or earlier for the net zero emission. And so far, as Pertamina, we already ourselves reduced about 8.5 million ton CO2 from 2010 on Scope 1 and Scope 2. That's our responsibility, I would say. Now, as far as the role of the Pertamina itself, apart from helping us helping the government, to net zero emission, to achieve the net zero emission target, as well as the growth. As per Pertamina, we have also a dual growth strategy, because the transition of the energy cannot be done overnight, right? We still need energy in form of the current, form like fossil fuel, especially in Indonesia. So that we are still working on the fossil fuel, but working also quite aggressively to develop the new and renewable energy, in which I'm in charge of it. So that's what we call the dual growth strategy. So in this new and renewable energy, we have some focus on the development. So we are talking about two things: electrification and transportation or mobility. When we are talking about electrification, we have to admit that we still have a lot of coal power plant. Why? Because we have abundant, quote unquote, coal in our yard. It's also quite abundant resources, relatively cheap. And when we talk about, let's say, 10, 15 years ago, we have lack of power, and at that time, we are not talking about green. We are talking about energy by itself, which is affordability is very important. So that's the reason why 10 to 15 years in the past, we developed a lot of energy electrification based on coal power plant. So now we are talking about how to transition this to the new and renewable, maybe phasing out the coal, but it also required some, capital to stop it, because it's still in the middle of, the economic of this power plant. So, but the government is really realized that, so we have a plan also gradually to reduce that and to increase the renewable. And as per Pertamina, now we are, for electrification, we have geothermal. So we have a lot of capacity for geothermal. We are in the ring of fire, what they call. We have around 24 gigawatt capacity in the country. At the moment, we only use 2.4 countrywide, so just 11% around. So we would like to increase more and more. And as a Pertamina, right now we operate around modestly 672 megawatt, but we would like to increase it to 1 gigawatt and then 3 gigawatt later on. So this plan is already in the pipeline, so we're working very hard with government to make it happen. And on the other hand, also we are trying to work on the hydrogen and other sources for the electrification. And the government is also pushing a lot for EV. It's not easy for the people to move to EV in Indonesia, because then you have to change your car. So that's the reason why we are now combine the EV initiatives, that's a lot of incentives already, with the biofuel. So we have quite successful story on biodiesel already. We are in B35, and we will need to increase to B40 and maybe B50 later on. For the gasoline, we are working on the bioethanol. So we are working now on two common feedstock, on the sugarcane as well as the corn. But we have to work also very, very carefully not to compete too much with the food.
Of course. John, let's leave it there, because you've mapped out very clearly your plan for renewable energy development here. And I have to talk to Jim, because Jim, you operate in a very different part of the world. That's mostly from the US, of course. A few words about your company, TerraGen. Your operating portfolio consists of 3.8 gigawatt of wind, solar, and battery storage projects across very different sites, mostly in California and Texas. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the role of energy storage, which is crucial, of course, in this transition, and the role it can play in supporting the integration. We talked about grid stability and integration, the integration of large-scale renewable energy into the grid.
Sure. Happy to do so. Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. We have about equal percentage of wind, solar, and solar. Wind, solar, and battery storage. I apologize. We used to do geothermal years ago, and you threw me off track. In any event, storage is really critical to the reliability of the grid, and I think it's well understood that the intermittent nature of renewables requires one to have battery storage if they're going to move towards a renewable-based grid. But the other factor that I think is a little less discussed and a little less understood, but we saw it very clearly this past year in California, is that battery storage is needed to deal with the seasonal variation that occurs with any renewable project. Our wind projects are driven by the Mojave Desert heating up and pulling cool air off of the Pacific. And so that's seasonal. When the weather is warm, you're going to get much more output. Our solar projects will produce 40% in the winter of what they're capable of producing in the summer months. So unless you're at the equator, you're going to have severe variability in production. What that leads to, if you're trying to have a grid that is 100% renewable, 24/7, 365, that leads to a situation where the summer months you have too much renewable energy on the grid. And what we saw this past year in California is some negative pricing where you had to pay to get on the grid. You want to use that energy because it's free energy. It's available from the sun or from the wind, but the grid can't accept it. And they have to balance the load versus the supply. That's a fundamental tenet of grid management. And to do that, what they do is charge people with renewable energy in the summer to get onto the grid. So the answer there is storage, and more of it, because what you can do is you can use that storage as a sink to help deal with that dynamic of seasonal variability.
Thank you very much. We need to wrap up this conversation, but before you go, I'm going to challenge you a little bit and maybe come up with one word that describes the key to scale up renewable energy.
Well, as we know that there is an urgent things related to climate change, right? So, and it's not a one-person action. It has to be done by everyone. So the key word for the successful effort is collaboration, collaborative effort, collective effort from everyone. Everybody has to play a role on this. And I'm quite sure that we can do that.
Thank you very much, John.
Jim.
Jim.
2 words. In the US, I think the key is probably permit modification. It takes very long. And if there's a sense of urgency about this, we're going to have to come up with a way of doing it more quickly, protecting the species and the environment, but it'll take us 4 to 6 years to permit a project. That is going to lead to a lot slower rollout of renewable generation than you would see with a tighter scale, a tighter time frame.
Yeah, lost time we definitely cannot afford at this stage, of course. Many thanks to both of you, Jim Pagano and John Annis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Another fantastic conversation here, of course, at Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week Summit. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, moving on very swiftly now, we are honored to hear from His Excellency Abdullah Ahmed Balala, the UAE Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs for Energy and Sustainability. Your Excellency, please come and join us. Thank you.
Okay, I need these people lined up in order behind me, please. No.
Excellencies, colleagues, distinguished guests, Assalamu alaikum. The United Arab Emirates stands at the forefront of global efforts to accelerate the transition to clean energy. Our commitment to fostering international partnerships and driving sustainable development has never been stronger. The UAE envisions itself as a trailblazer in clean energy and sustainability, setting ambitious targets and launching groundbreaking initiatives. Our goal is to generate 50% of our energy from clean sources by 2050, demonstrating our unwavering dedication to combating climate change. We recognize that the challenges of climate change and the energy transition cannot be addressed in isolation. That is why the UAE actively engage in bilateral and multilateral agreements to promote clean energy cooperation worldwide. Our efforts extend far beyond our borders. At COP28, we launched the Accelerated Partnerships for Renewables in Africa, in collaborations with member states such as Kenya, Denmark, and Germany, and the International Renewable Agency, IRENA, which holds the Secretariat. APRA is an ambitious African-led initiative with the potential to revolutionize the Africa energy sector by mobilizing energy projects and providing technical assistance and engaging the private sector too. The Global Climate Finance Center, GCFC, based here in Abu Dhabi, which I had the pleasure to attend their first annual meeting yesterday, was established also with a clear and ambitious purpose to mobilize the capital needed for climate action and to position the UAE as a global leader in climate finance. This center serves as a platform for collaboration, innovation, accountability, and catalyzing the development of climate finance frameworks globally and addressing key barriers to investment flows. GCFC also serves as a secretariat for the Global Climate Finance Framework and the African Green Investment Initiative. In January 2017, at Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, here in this building, we launched the UAE Caribbean Renewable Energy Fund, a $50 million grant fund. This fund represents one of the largest single investments in the Caribbean clean energy sector. The initiative deploys renewable energy projects in 16 Caribbean countries, enhancing their energy security and resilience. Cross-border power system integration offers immense potential for reducing costs and increasing efficiency. Studies have shown that cross-border integration can contribute to cost reductions, improve energy security, and enhance resilience to extreme localized events, such as natural disasters and cyber attacks. Research conducted by Oxford Policy Management on South Asia and Southern Africa found that increased cross-border energy trade and green grid development in South Asia could result in a system cost saving from 200 to 300 billion US dollars between 2015 to 2025. Furthermore, this would lead to a 4.5% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2035, which leads to improved energy security and reliability and more efficient use of renewable resources across the region. To fully realize these benefits, countries must overcome several challenges, and these challenges including enhancing and harmonizing policy and regulatory frameworks and market rules to attract long-term investments, developing appropriate cost-sharing mechanisms for infrastructure investments and comprehensive transition strategies for grid infrastructure, building trust and political consensus among participating nations and fostering greater collaboration among nations, international organizations, industry stakeholders. And finally, coordinating system operations across borders and increasing investments in renewable technologies and innovative solutions. Excellencies, distinguished guests, the UAE remain committed to leading by example. Our recent pledge of $4.5 billion US dollars to boost clean energy projects in Africa demonstrates our dedication to this noble cause. Through initiatives like Ittihad 7, we aim to provide 100 million people across Africa with clean electricity by 2035. Meanwhile, with the UAE Caribbean Fund, we continue deploying renewable energy projects in the Caribbean and enhancing energy security and resilience. Let us unite and intensify our efforts to accelerate the global transition to clean energy. And together, and only together, we can build a sustainable, resilient future for all. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you for this very insightful and inspiring account of the UAE's role in accelerating sustainable energy transformation and on building global energy partnerships. We are indeed in this quest together, globally, regionally, and nationally, of course. And looking at our global speaker lineup today and at you, of course, esteemed guests in the audience, well, it's beautiful to see that the world is coming together around this indeed. Our next panel now will bring together visionary leaders to reveal cutting-edge innovations and breakthrough business models that will revolutionize how we transmit and distribute clean energy across the globe. I am delighted to welcome a very familiar face here at the summit. That's Edna Trina, who will be leading this panel. Thank you.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, and thank you all so much for being here. As you can see, we're going to talk about the great grid upgrade, and I have a great panel here with me that's going to look at this and really inform you and educate you about what's been happening and what is about to happen. Let me very quickly introduce you to them. I have with me here His Excellency Saif Al-Kabesi. He is the Acting Director General of Regulatory Affairs at the Department of Energy, Abu Dhabi. Lovely to have you. Dr. Zhu Yong is with us. She's the Director of National Key Laboratory Power Grid Safety from China Electric Power Research Institute. Andy Herkowitz joins us also. Andy is the CEO of Mission 300 Accelerator from the Rockefeller Foundation. Dr. Bruce Steddall, lovely to have you too, the COO of TACA Transmission. From Siemens Energy, the Managing Director here in the UAE, Khalid bin Hadi, and Greg Manuel joins us. He's the Head of Climate and Energy Commercialization with Google X, Alphabet's Moonshot Factory. What a great lineup I have here. So the grid that keeps us all well and happy and connected, so important, the grid. Dr. Saif, if I may ask you and start. You know, UAE has committed to net zero by 2050. That's a very ambitious transition, I think, for, well, it's all ambitious, I think, for everybody. But given the growth in the region, the industrial growth, the population growth, I mean, talk to me about how the grid is going to handle this and the opportunities that are there. How are we going to get it right?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Ethan, for having me in this important panel. If we look at Abu Dhabi 20 years ago, it's totally different from the demand angle and from the population growth. By 2045, we expect the population to double and also the economy. Therefore, we need to be ready and to cater for this huge demand. Also, bearing in mind, we have a commitment toward 2035, we need our energy to be 60% from clean sources. And by 2050, we need to decarbonize the whole mix to become net zero. In order to achieve that, we as the Department of Energy have in place some regulatory tools. One of them is the planning angle. So we expect the sector companies like Emirates Water and Electricity Company to submit the Statement of Future Capacity for 7 years. In this Statement of Future Capacity, they will give the demand forecast and the capacity required. At the same time, we have our colleagues also here in the panel. Bruce, he's from the Transco Transmission Company. They are also submitting to us the planning statement, 5 years for the network, and how to expand the network and what are the things needed to cater for the capacity coming. In addition to that, we implementing and facilitating the smart grid implementation, in which we need to integrate different types of technologies like solar, wind, nuclear, while maintaining the power stable and ensure it's flexible to cater for this clean energy sources. And hopefully, these are done through the sector, through one of the pioneer pioneer companies like Siemens Energy, they are supporting the sector with this new technology and the new to cater for the smart grid. With regard to the digital systems also, the Department of Energy is facilitating the transfer and the transformation for the companies to be digital in all aspects, starting from the planning, construction, asset management, until the interface with the customers. So we are promoting in how to become digital, smart, ensuring the customer understand the consumption, the behavior, and we try to utilize these data in order to inform how we can be conservative, and this will fit into energy efficiency programs. Therefore, these initiatives make Abu Dhabi grow, sustainable, and maintaining the whole aspects.
And it's almost about being ahead of the curve, so to speak, knowing what's coming. Dr. Yi Young, in China, there has been an upgrade of the grid, but how do you make sure, again, with the rapid development of such new energy in China, that you can actually deliver, stable operation and safe operation as well?
Okay, thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. By 2024, the installed capacity of new energy in China has reached 1.9 billion kilowatts. And it is predicted in 2030, maybe it will reach 2.4 billion kilowatts. So I think the following measures is very important to realize the sustainable development and safe and stability operation. The first is scientific planning. The relationship between the new energy and traditional energy, overall and local government and market, and new energy development and conservation need to be handled well. Secondly, about the regulation ability. I think it's very important to improve the system regulation ability. The flexibility of traditional energy generation need to be improved, and the energy storage, the application of large-scale energy storage need to be promoted, and the global forming technology need to be used effectively to improve the system and interference abilities. All parties need to participate in the system regulation. And the third is about UHV technology. And we still need to develop UHV transmission to realize the resource location, carrying, and consumption capacity of the large system. China now has around 20 HVDC links. And in 2030, we will have around 40 HVDC links.
I mean, really, I think, leading the way in many ways, too, and just moving non-stop ahead.
Okay.
Andy, now you work a lot, and a lot of your background work and development work in Africa, but also when we look at the energy sector, many countries in the world are having a challenge dealing with their grid, but Africa is such a huge continent. I mean, there's probably particular problems there. Do we need to pay maybe special attention to what's happening there?
Not only do we have to pay special attention, let's start with the fact that there are, of the 700 million people in the world who don't have access to electricity, 600 million of them are in Africa. We're talking about people who don't even have a light bulb. They're using kerosene, and they're nowhere near the grid. And even with proper planning, it's likely that it could be another 30 years before the grid would even arrive to many of those households. So the World Bank and the African Development Bank, to their credit, launched Mission 300 with the goal of getting 300 million Africans access to electricity by 2030. And keep in mind, of those 600 million people who don't have access to electricity, 78% of them can't even afford it. So what we need, while there's really well-intentioned big announcements of financing for climate and all these things happening in the rest of the world, you've got 50 countries in sub-Saharan Africa who combine their GDP as the equivalent of Turkey is. So we, as development partners and others, we need to really leverage private sector finance by taking on some of that risk and making it so that private sector can invest, because we need that private sector investment, but we need to be able to de-risk it for them. And there's a tremendous opportunity to do that, and that's what the World Bank is doing with African Development Bank, the support of Rockefeller Foundation, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, and Sustainable Energy for All.
Yeah, and we have to remember just how big that is, so we can't ignore it. Bruce, now, many of you might have heard today there was a great announcement here at this event, an MOU signed with Italy, Albania, and the UAE for an energy subsea cable that's going to have a big connectivity story, and it'll be run by the grid from Terna in Italy. I mean, TACA's going to be in there somehow, so this is an example, I think, of the great work that's happening cross-country and cross-continent. But, you know, good for you on that. I know you haven't delivered it yet, and everybody will be working on it, but well done. And it's great to see and hear these things happening. But the existing grid around the world, as we know, I mean, was not designed to actually hold the energy that's sort of coming through today. Talk to me about that upgrade and where the big challenges are, because it has to be upgraded fast.
Yes, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so, I mean, you know, the grid has historically been developed based on having sort of large central sort of production facilities being transmitted and then distributed. And I mean, it's clear with the energy transition that is changing, and we need to change with that. I mean, within the UAE, we really embarked on this most probably in 2010, where we did a lot of work actually introducing the first nuclear plant into Abu Dhabi at Baraka, which is now fully operational as of last year. And that journey continues with with some large-scale deployments of PV, with us now having about 2.5 gigawatts of PV in commercial operation. And I mean, some of you will have been here yesterday where another announcement was made about another very big PV plus BESS project to provide baseload energy, essentially being driven by demands that we didn't really think about 5 years ago in terms of AI data centers. So aside from us migrating from conventional forms of generation to clean and renewable forms of generation, there's also on the demand side different things happening, and again that's having to decarbonize. So there's more or less a surge, you could more or less call it, in demand. And irrespective of these changes that are happening, customers still expect secure and reliable supplies, as mentioned by Safe there, and we need to ensure we can deliver those expectations.
I mean, it is secure, reliable, affordable. I mean, we have to bring it all together. Khaled, we often hear the phrase, there will be no energy transition, no transition without transmission. So if we don't get the transmission right, and you can almost visualize how that happens, we're all going to be in trouble. I mean, every industry, every entertainment, everything, it all comes to a halt if we don't get this right. Talk to me about why this is so important that we actually get it right, and now we have this opportunity for the big grid upgrade.
I think when the energy transition started to be one of the focus and discussions, we completely ignored the transmission part of it. And until now, we discovered that we can talk about any growth that we want from our renewables, from increased capacities and the demand that we're seeing. But if we don't have the right transmission infrastructure, we will not be able to cater for the future growth. The energy business in general is a future business. Whatever you build for today, it will cater for 30 to 50 years. So, and I think as of today, it's very important where I see now most of the regulators, companies like ourselves, Siemens Energies, and TACA, and others are becoming focused on transmissions, because transmission is the backbone of the energy infrastructure. And without having this correct, it will not be able to progress for the future that we are looking for. I was reading a report, and according to IEA, said 3,000 gigawatt of renewables, being stuck, not being able to deliver the project because the transmission is not yet ready. So you can imagine, and of course there are many examples, but you can imagine with a simple example of that, that will also hold us back to meet the renewable and the net zero target. And I think what's really important as of today, the business model have changed significantly. Is not longer about I sit and I wait for a tender. It's about joint effort where regulators, government, private, and also banks come together to discuss the future and the design of the energy infrastructures. And we as a company, Siemens Energy, we invest €1 billion annually on innovations. Innovation that will support to upgrade the existing infrastructure, such as digitalizations, stabilizing the grids, new technologies. It's not about only just supplying equipment, it's about how can I have a reliable, stable, efficient, and affordable grid that can meet the requirements of the communities. It's not about government, it's about the communities and supply it. As you said, like in Africa, there are 700 people don't have access to electricities. But imagine there are more than 1 billion or over don't have access to a reliable electricity.
You know, 10 years ago, Google X would not have been on this panel. So we're so excited to actually have you here. And again, when we look at it, and particularly the moonshot factory, a lot has to be done. We can't do this in small stages. Talk to us, Greg, in terms of the size, the scale, and I suppose the urgency of getting this done.
Absolutely. So when we looked at this problem, like we do every moonshot, it has to meet a certain threshold. Meaning, unless we can affect the lives of 1 billion people or more, it's not a moonshot for us. So when we investigate opportunities where we can bring our talents, our skills of our engineers and our scientists to bring to bear to make the world better, what do we want to focus on? And the energy transition was one of the key areas of focus that we identified a number of years ago. And one of the platform technologies that we have been advancing for the better part of 7 years now is a platform technology called Tapestry. And what we have done is be able to really look at this question of how to upgrade and up-level the energy grid, how to make it more reliable, how to make it more resilient, how to make it more flexible. How do we generate the kind of plasticity of an energy grid which started getting built over 130 years ago? It is humankind's largest machine in aggregate. And how do we, without rebuilding it, how do we get it to actually work in the context of what is needed today? More EV vehicles, energy storage, intermittent sources of energy, obviously to complement baseload power. How do we actually deliver every marginal megawatt at the lowest cost and at the lowest CO2 footprint? And so that was what we looked to do with Tapestry. And we're really excited that we have made massive advances. We're working in 6 different countries right now at various stages. And Chile, for example, as of this year, is using Tapestry to plan their grid, which we're able to work with them on to give them the kind of granularity where they can see 20 years in the future, hour by hour. That creates enormous flexibility, enormous sort of better capital expenditure decisions, lower OpEx, et cetera. So that for us is the big opportunity, the moonshot, if you will, to really up-level the energy grid into where it needs to go.
And do you want to come in on what Khaled was talking about, and also perhaps if you'll, with that, to maybe just talk a little bit about finance as well.
So I want to emphasize what your point about that transmission gets ignored. Transmission is the trifecta in that, number one, it's going to accelerate decarbonization. Because when you can trade power across borders, you take Africa, for example, a lot of people say you need to have fossil fuels in Africa. Right now you do. But if you're able to import inexpensive geothermal power and hydropower from other countries that don't have other sources of base load energy, then you solve that issue. Number two, it drives access because it brings down costs as well. So I mentioned how many people can't afford electricity. You bring down the cost, more people can afford it as well. And then the other piece is energy security. You know, when people are interdependent on one another, it tends to create greater energy security in the African context. Part of what we're doing, again, is trying to be more creative by turning these institutions like the World Bank, African Development Bank, into leveraging institutions, not lending institutions. What do I mean by that? It means that we care much less about the return that we're earning, but we're realizing that we can make better use of money that traditionally was used as grant capital to buy down the cost of transactions, de-risk so that private capital will come in. That's what we need to change. We need to change the global financial architecture. There's not more money out there, but we just need to shift how the money is spent, and we will see multiples of investment moving forward.
Dr. E. Young, talk to us a little bit about where you see international cooperation moving very fast, given technology developments and all of that, but the need for this to be a global solution.
Yes, I just talk about the power system simulation technology. It's very important for the planning, construction, and operation, just as you know. But with the development of the massive new energy and UHVDC links, massive power electronic equipments has penetrated to the all aspects of the power system. So for the traditional simulation technology, it has being enabled to describe accurately the characteristic of stability, so which cannot meet the development of power industry. So it's necessary to innovate simulation technology and to improve the accuracy and efficiency, because more accurate the simulator, the better the control and the safer the operation. So SGCC has taken the lead in the research of the electromagnetic transient technology, simulation technology for large-scale power system research. So after 10 years efforts, a new simulation platform has been constructed in our lab with more accuracy and efficiency. And we have also used this technology to support the development of the new energy in China.
And we have to be a bit efficient on this panel, Bruce. Very quickly here, tell me the technology that can actually help in terms of, the international cooperation as well.
Well, I mean, in terms of technologies, particularly for international cooperation, it's clear that, those like HVDC play an important role. And indeed, perhaps picking up what Andy mentioned, perhaps in a slightly different way, we are working on projects like interconnecting countries like Morocco to the UK through these technologies to ensure that we can get access to, let's say, resources that are available in one jurisdiction that can be made use of elsewhere. And that's a bit like the one that your opening comment about Albania, Italy as well.
Khaled, quickly we look at Siemens Energy, an international corporation, an international company, again, really moving at the forefront of technology. Is this going to be the savior of the grid?
Definitely. We will not be able to do it on our own. We will require the partners. We need the regulators to work with very closely to unlock the obstacles that we are seeing and to move the progress quicker. We will need finance, because finance will play an important role to advance the technology, to advance the project, and also to increase the renewables. And then we will need reliable partners that can execute and deliver. This is very important. And I think today what we are seeing is not about myself, it's about the countries that I'm seeing and I'm witnessing next to me. You will see moving forward the interconnecting between countries coming up very soon. And the HVDC business will play an important role. And that's why the three triangles that I have explained, the regulators, the investments, and the technology partners need to come together to design the system of the future.
Dr. Saif, I know we have to wrap this up very quickly, but give us, regulators sometimes can be a hindrance, but they can also be a great help and they can be a great enabler. Talk to me about where you see, the role of the regulator to make sure that we move forward.
Thank you. I would like just to comment on the collaboration. Collaboration is very important and key success of Abu Dhabi system. Without collaboration, you will not learn from the global best practices and try to implement it here or the other way around. Sometimes Abu Dhabi has the best practices, which could be a benchmark for other countries. We had successful stories for the GCC interconnection, where we linked with the GCCIA country from our Dhafra region or western region of Abu Dhabi to Saudi Arabia. And now we are extending that link to upgrade the link to interconnect and transmit extra power. Coming back to the role of the regulator. A regulator should be agile, flexible, and promote innovation and ensure it's seen as a partner. And this has been changed over the years, definitely. So Abu Dhabi system and the regulator in Abu Dhabi is more flexible partner, facilitator, rather than a hindrance. And with having the regulator in place, the investor will have the confidence that I can come and invest in Abu Dhabi because there is a regulator that can protect my rights. There is a regulator can ensure there is a codes in place. There is a regulator ensure there is roles and responsibility defined. There is no interference. There is nothing will be done in the system. So there is a system. So I consider the regulator in Abu Dhabi very mature and very supportive to any energy transition.
No, I definitely wasn't suggesting that the regulator in Abu Dhabi was a hindrance, but around the world we hear it occasionally. We have to wrap this up. I'm going to leave it to you to give us a moonshot. Where to go, Greg? What do we need to do urgently now to make sure we get there?
So we need to go fast. I think that's been a recurring theme across many, many conversations in this conference. We need to do more, and we need to do it smarter. And one of the things that I hope, coming out of this conversation and the many meetings we've had over the last couple of days and going into tomorrow and the rest of the week, is finding this opportunity to collaborate. And one of the areas that we're very focused on is data. Of course, that's what Google does quite well. And energy is about electrons. Energy is also about data. And with better data, there's better information, and we can make better decisions together. So let's work together. There's a lot ahead of us. We need to go faster. We need to do more. And excited to be working with many of you going in the future.
And thank you all. Sorry, we've had to go a bit fast on this. This has been our express grid upgrade. I want to thank all of you for being with us here. Greg, thank you so much. Khaled, Bruce, Andrew, Dr. E. Young, thank you so much. And His Excellency, Dr. Saif. Thank you all so much. And thanks for your great sharing all that knowledge with us. We could talk about this for a long time because this grid will go on, but we'll make sure it's top of the agenda next time. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Etna, and your fantastic guests for a great conversation. Now, moving on from the great grid upgrade to breakthrough innovations in energy storage, please welcome our next conversation here at ADSW Summit. We'll look at harnessing the unprecedented drop in price, in the price of batteries to accelerate a sustainable transition, among many other key questions, of course, around energy storage. And leading this conversation, please welcome Sarah Forrester. She's news editor at The National, and our esteemed speakers, Rizwan Razak of Huawei and Andy Biffen of Emirates Water and Electricity Company. And please, yes, go ahead with your round of applause for our guests. Thank you.
Hi, and good afternoon. Welcome to our panel. Energy storage is the key to unlocking a fully renewable future. With an efficient and reliable way to store energy, we can maximize the benefits of wind, solar, hydroelectric energy, and provide access to sorely needed underserved communities. Addressing the challenge will mean investing in new technologies and scaling solutions in order to create a cleaner and more equitable planet for future generations. I'm Sarah Forster, news editor at The National, and I'm joined by my esteemed guests here who I feel have already been introduced, but I will introduce them again. We have Andy Biffen, Asset Development Executive Director at Emirates Water and Electricity Company, Matthew Clare from Mazda Arlington, and Rizwan Razak, CTO at Huawei. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
So if I can just start with you, Rizwan. I'd like to talk about advancing next-generation energy storage technologies beyond lithium-ion batteries. Can you tell us what research and development efforts are needed in order to make that happen?
Sure. So as a technology provider and an integrator of energy storage across the globe, the extensive research required in order to adopt the new types of technologies requires the lengthy process of testing and verification and the level of R&D development, such as what we've done in the lithium ion at the moment, where that has taken over 10 years before we deployed a safe, reliable solution to the market itself. So we obviously have seen lead-acid batteries being utilized for years before. Lithium ion has now become profitable in a sense where, in the scale of the projects themselves, can be ramped up quite extensively. And we've seen that in projects such as in the Red Sea, 1.3 gigawatt-hour microgrid application. Going forward, we do see upcoming shifts from lithium ion, but the extent of research at this stage is still undergoing. So aspects such as sodium ion is something that the teams are working on at the moment. But the extent of testing and verification requires at least a few more years before those types of technologies become viable enough to utilize in a safe and a reliable solution.
Thank you. Matthew, talking about one of the most important parts of this area, sustainable and ethical sourcing of raw materials, how can we ensure that that's done when it comes to battery production and address concerns about the environmental and social impacts that are associated with mining and the processing of these materials?
Sure. So I think, first of all, the ESG is an important pillar of all of Masdal's procurement. So it's a very important aspect that we try to drill down into as much as possible. And that can be more complicated the more layers of the supply chain that are involved. So you have integrators and they have a supply chain of many subcontractors that all the way down to the lithium itself. And so we do a lot of work ourselves. We work with consultants to try and really get under the bonnet of the supply chain's commitment to ESG. And I think it's fair to say that it's a relatively new area for a number of them. I don't think the first wave of deployment, which has been predominantly private equity led, have done as much homework. I don't think the lenders within market have been as hot on it as perhaps they should, but we are seeing that we're trying to be a driving force behind that. The other important thing that needs to be considered alongside that is the kind of end of life and recycling capability of what happens to the lithium at the end of life. And when we say end of life, we're talking 15, 17 years down to about 60% capacity. So those systems still have a use, and I think it's important that we as a company, but also as an industry, find a way to deploy those into other economies that require more power-based services than capacity, because your degradation is just on the capacity element. But also really push the supply chain, and work's underway to do this already, to look more into how the lithium can be kind of taken back in and then repurposed, reused. There is development in that already, and also more modular recycling to make sure that the carbon footprint of that entire process is reduced as much as possible, so that you have an asset that is deployed in the UK, it is then recycled at end of life, either to another kind of closer by second market, or actually just repurposed facilities in the UK. It's a new area, but it's an extremely important one that is developing, and we have a firm eye on exactly our obligations, but also the supply chain's obligations in that.
Mm. Andy, my next question is for you, but I just would ask Rizwan if you want to weigh in on the same topic.
Yep, I think as an aspect of a vendor and technology provider, the extent of research and bankability products is something that is a concerning point. We've seen that ramp up on scale on the containerized batteries at this stage, go from scales of 2 megawatt to, as we've seen in the market, 6, 8 megawatt hour in the same facility. But are we doing the necessary due diligence in the technology such as the lithium ion, the cell type, the technology verification process. So, vendors, grid operators don't see down to that granular level. So the extent of research and vendors to standardize the actual impact on the qualification process is something that needs to be expanded on. We are working with close consultants, as mentioned from Mazda side as well, to ensure that these get illustrated and implemented as soon as possible in a safe and reliable way.
Andy, let's talk policy and regulatory framework. How can those be designed to really effectively incentivize the deployment of energy storage at various scales?
Okay, so I think the first thing to separate in the discussion is that we're not a merchant market here. So, it's a closed market. We develop projects, we invite parties in, and we set a tariff. So, first off, the purpose for a battery in this market would be for ancillary services, essentially. So, when we develop a project, it's centered around provision of those services. That's the base case. In a merchant market, I think many people will be aware, you're looking at energy arbitrage, so you're looking at a price for those, for megawatts. You're basically trading megawatts. You're charging up when energy is low and prices are low, and you're discharging when they're high. So to develop our first EWEC project, we've had to look at that in a slightly new way to form that business case. In terms of the grid code, there are things that need to be reconsidered, again, associated with ancillary services, because a battery can perform way more than a synchronous generator. So the services that it provide aren't actually written into that grid code, into that regulation at the moment. So I think that does need to catch up. I'm sure that will happen over time.
How much time are you thinking?
Well, the regulation is always being reviewed. It's an ongoing process. The first battery project, like I say, will provide ancillary services. The particular one we look at is primary frequency response, for example. So that's when the discharge of the battery is sent into the network as frequency drops, and it will far outperform a synchronous generator. So we're talking about months, years for that regulation to catch up.
So I think just in terms of regulation in the UK, because it's a very different application market, it started life as a more enhanced frequency type service. We had some regulatory issues around double charging on BESS import-export, co-location with solar, that you'd lose the ROCs, and that's been worked out. We now find ourselves in another regulatory kind of tangle where there's an oversupply for capacity on the grid, data centers, battery developers, solar developers. The grid can't handle it, doesn't know quite how to do that, and so we're stuck in a lot of grid reform at the moment. And I think one of the issues that needs to be unbundled slightly is National Grid in the UK implementing that policy to try and do the right thing and to size the market, but actually also allowing assets online which are ultimately merchant assets, and the merchant market should determine how many BESS get built if there's still simple kind of economic mechanics that if it's worth doing, you do it.
Great. Matthew, I'm going to stick with you, if that's all right. And we're going to talk about a topic that is very current in the minds of many consumers, and that is addressing critical concerns around fire prevention, thermal management, the safe handling of battery chemicals. How can we ensure the safety of large-scale BESS systems when addressing those concerns?
Sure. So good question, and I think it talks to one of the points earlier that there's a real push to get as many megawatt hours into smaller spaces as possible, especially in the UK. We are quite short on land. It's no secret. And with that innovation and with that desire for greater density comes concerns around safety. So if you look at a number of the examples of where things have gone wrong, I think that's a good place to start as to how you future-proof yourself, but also just a general commitment to actually putting that on your agenda. There is almost an infinite amount of money that you could spend trying to make that happen. You need to find a corporately responsible middle ground for that. A lot of emphasis goes onto supply chain, but also ourselves to check that the fire suppression systems have been sized appropriately for our application. If we start wanting to do more aggressive things with the battery, trade it more, it naturally needs more auxiliary power to power the fire suppression system. So quite often issues occur when the battery is being pushed to do things that it's not comfortable with and was never designed to. And so really you just need to keep a monitor on that. There's a lot of technology development in AI of actually second guessing when errors are going to occur before they do. And so we're exploring a lot of that. And I could probably talk on that topic for a lot longer, but I'll free up some time to take the other questions. But
well, I actually just want to pass over to Rizwan, obviously Chief Technology Officer at Huawei.
Yeah, so from that aspect, rightfully mentioned, we've got to look at the historical problems, how they have arisen, and ensure that the products and solutions that are being available in the market are able to limit the challenges from the past itself. So, we've seen that in battery storage projects specifically. Operation and maintenance is quite a big challenge. Other aspects is the suppression system. Is it digitalized? Is it utilizing the size of the facility itself? And what is the protocols and methods implemented for the suppression system itself? So methods that we have utilized is, as we've been in the PV sector for several years already, we're using modular technology in the power converters, and we've also implemented that in the ESS facilities as well. So using modular pack applications for initial safety, but also to ensure that that digitalization can be utilized from the EMS application itself to ensure that from both sides it's a cost-effective approach.
And moving on to Andy, I'd like to ask you about business models, market mechanisms, and the innovation that's taking place in these areas. What can be done to really unlock the full value of energy storage?
Yeah, thank you. So again, I think with batteries, you've got two distinct models. The type of developer that we see in a merchant market is one that is trading power prices, and a battery is ideal as something to give them some security around those power prices and give them a mechanism to trade with. With our particular model, we're looking at securing capacity and making a safe payment for that capacity with very little risk for the owner of that battery. So what we've had to look at EWEC is a mechanism very much structured around our conventional IWPP type model, where you have investors that will procure a technology, develop the project, and have the safety of the security of those capacity payments, whereby really the only risk they're left with is things like operation and maintenance risk, which can quite often, in most cases, be backed off by warranties, guarantees, or other service type agreements. It sort of begs the question, what's left in it for the developer of these projects, because they become quite small projects. Although the capex is a lot, it becomes a smaller project than a conventional sort of gas-fired project or a solar project. But that's the model we're running with the sort of first phase of batteries. Like I say, we've got the first battery project in development at the moment, bids in at the end of this month, so exciting time.
An exciting time, absolutely. Would you like to weigh in, Matthew?
Yeah, sure. I think the UK is just a very different example. It's probably at the far end of the merchant strategy, if you like. And we are constantly pushing the boundaries of what the battery needs to do and what we want it to do. We want the warranties to be as flexible as possible, with no or minimal downtime between a full export and a full import, or vice versa. And again, that's where you start, that introducing heat that needs to be managed, and the heat ultimately is what drives issues on the warranty. So we put a lot of work into assessing those factors and actually our use case when considering the kind of acquisition cost of the batteries, because we are asking it to do a number of very different things than, you know, the UK 7-8 years ago, which were frequency dominated, which use at maximum kind of 20% of the power requirement up or down.
Okay, let's talk about really integrating large-scale energy storage into the existing grid infrastructure and kind of trying to ensure that seamless coordination with other grid components. Andy, do you want to, it's a question for everyone, but Andy, do you want to start?
Yeah, so again, EWEC as a system operator, so we understand the economics of our grid, the way that plant is dispatched on an economic basis. Again, I mentioned ancillary services a few times, but the way that we would look at a battery as a way of saving fuel for the provision of ancillary services from other sources, so generally other gas turbine plant that would normally be running or be in some sort of backup mode to provide those services. A battery is ideal for the provision of those services because it can do so from a standing start in literally milliseconds. So, you know, it's perfect for assisting the operability of the network. So it's ideal for the system operator. And again, our system operator isn't there to trade energy. He's really just there for the operability. I think, you know, again, depends a lot on economics of the battery and the tariffs that we receive on the first bid, but it may be that we see other projects that come through simply to stabilize the network as we get more and more introduction of renewable energy, particularly solar. I always give the example of the sort of the perfect storm at the end of the day, sort of 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening. We've got all of this solar energy that's all coming off, falling in generation simply because of the sun setting, and we have to pick that up with real energy. We will always have those gas turbines or other sources of energy on standby, ready to pick up that predicted reduction in solar energy. If a gas turbine fails to start or can't pick up load or something like that, then it will be the job of the battery to pick up and give you that security.
And Matthew, what about in the UK?
Yeah, so in the UK, there's a bit of a misunderstanding of how batteries actually work, and I think that gap will be plugged with data, operational data. But the way in which policy and regulation runs in the UK, you have the distribution companies, you have National Grid, which is split into different departments, which look after different things, policy and the actual infrastructure. And they accept projects at distribution level and transmission, and the interface is quite an interesting world at the moment. What that is leading to is a misconception that a battery comes online, it has an import-export connection. It's in an area that has lots of renewable generation, which are export assets. At the moment, it's being layered on top, the BES is being layered on top, and that kind of crashes the design model and the engineering behind how the grid actually operates. But in actuality, if all of the renewables are at full export, it means that pricing theoretically is going to be pretty cheap. And so the chances of your battery then wanting to export at the same time is very low. And so there just needs to be a bit more of an operational development in terms of National Grid taking our data, understanding how it works, actually on the system rather than just modelling it on paper, which is also leading to a lot of reform on required infrastructure works that on paper look like they're needed, but actually if you use the system properly and use the batteries efficiently, they can actually help the system. There are other issues of inertia that are showing their faces. Coal and gas comes offline, but that's kind of I guess the second bounce of the ball.
I'll expand on that as well, just partly in terms of the technology components such as the key items such as the PCS. You know, we've seen most of these kind of renewable assets being grid following, and in the coming years when the grid infrastructure is now changing, becoming more weaker, we are needing to utilize these items in a more grid forming fashion. more as a stability aspect. And as we've seen, a large amount of solar has already been adopted, and now we're looking at, quite large scales of gigawatt scale energy storage. So the standards are changing, and items such as grid forming components are required. Now, obviously, the expansion on what does that grid forming really mean, how does that tolerate, and how does that function in the right fashion for that specific grid, as the fluctuations start occurring and grids become weaker year on year.
Well, it feels appropriate to end with a question about the future, which I'm no doubt sure we will see. Thank you, gentlemen. We've run out of time. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you to our guests.
Thank you.
Sarah, of course, and many thanks to all your panelists for sharing the promising developments in energy storage innovations. We are now going to take a look at the power of behavioral change to achieve sustainability goals and inspire action. Indeed, we all have a part to play. We are all stakeholders in this transition, and that's why we are here at the ADSW Summit. And whilst we're there, did you know that 71% of global consumers consider sustainability crucial to their purchasing decisions? And whilst they do, only 22% have made major changes to be more environmentally friendly. That was the subject of my conversation yesterday around energy systems. So now here to tell us more about how to unlock the behavioral revolution needed to drive systemic change and bridging the gap between environmental consciousness and action are Mirella Vitale and her panelists. And once again, please join me in extending a very welcome to our guests this afternoon. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mirella Vitale, the Chief Marketing Officer of the Rockwool Group, and I'm here with my panel, Aisha El-Khatbi, who's the Director of Planning and Performance Management at the Abu Dhabi Environmental Agency, Anna Sobadal, who's President and CEO of Equinor, Fiona Morgan, Chief Purpose Officer at SailGP, Patricia Bubna, who's Founder and CEO at Orbillion Bio, and Dr. Uma Valetti, who's the founder and CEO at Upside Foods. So we have a very interesting topic, so we're going to dive right into it. But we're talking about the green domino effect and how behaviors and actions of influencers, individuals, whether they're governments or corporations, can actually create this ripple effect and improve and drive sustainable development in society. But we all know that some fundamentals need to be in place before consumers can actually act. And one of these big topics that has been here over the past 2 days is the energy transition. So I'm actually going to direct my first question to you, Anas. We all know that energy transition plays a fundamental role, but it's not without challenges. There's costs, there's a need for incentives, regulation, grid connections that are missing. We've heard that a lot over the last 2 days. So from the perspectives of an energy producer, how do you assess this transformation and this transition, and what incentives are working out there?
Well, it's a big question, a difficult question, because I think when you talk about the energy transition, it moves at different paces in different parts of the world, different pace between different technologies as well. So there's not one speed for the energy transition. We are the largest energy provider to Europe. We are a Norwegian company providing Europe with a lot of energy, oil, gas, and renewables. So my perspectives are a little bit kind of European on this. But what we see is a large speed on electricity, solar, wind, both onshore and offshore, while the decarbonization of the heavy industry goes a little bit slower, like hydrogen, carbon capture and storage. So you will see there is a varying speed, and I think governments struggle finding the right balance between sustainability, energy security, and affordability that they need to do. When it comes to really what's needed now, it's stability, regulatory framework. I have to say, as both oil and gas producer and electricity producer, the regulatory framework for oil and gas is much easier, much more streamlined than the regulatory framework for renewables and low-carbon solutions. So that is what we need to get the domino effect.
The domino effect, great. But then I'm going to lead into that to Aisha, because you spoke about policy and governments getting involved and creating those frameworks. And exactly, we're talking and we're asking individuals and organizations to change their behaviors. But what is the role of government in this? And in particular, what is it you're doing here in the UAE to drive that systemic change?
So I'll resume from where Andrew mentioned that sometimes it's difficult to implement policy, but when you do it in a comprehensive approach, it shouldn't be. So as a government, as a policymaker, we should provide a supportive environment for sustainable consumption. An example of this in Abu Dhabi, we implemented the single-use plastic policy, which is considered the first policy of its kind on the GCC countries and in the Arab world from both approach and comprehensiveness. It is focused on regulation. It focused also on providing incentives and also running environmental campaigns. All of this was done through a public-private partnership approach, which made it much easier when it came to implementation and having everybody on board from a consumer perspective, community, from all community angles. So we started in 2022 in Abu Dhabi when we started a ban on single-use plastic bags, followed by a ban on styrofoam. That resulted in lowering more than 360 million plastic bags and also a compliance rate of more than 97% on the policy. Now, regulations without incentives cannot go smoothly. So incentives represent a powerful tool to transform behavior of people and also promote sustainable consumption. We provided, in collaboration with major retailers across Abu Dhabi, alternative for reusable bags, as well as plastic bottles return scheme. When they return, they use plastic bottles for recycling, and in exchange of that, incentives were provided in terms of vouchers, discounts, cash back, and sometimes that all resulted in increase of 2,000% increase in reusable bag usage in Abu Dhabi.
Perfect. I'm going to come back to you a little later, but I just want to jump on because we're talking about changing behaviors and driving consumer change. And we all know that sports has a real unifying impact, right? It creates movements. There's a lot of rallying around sports. So Fiona, what is it that you're doing with the sports, and what does your platform drive in order to create some kind of a movement for sustainability?
Yeah, so I'm from SailGP, which is like Formula One on the water, but our boats are powered by nature. So we very much are authentic and believe that we are a sustainable kind of ambassadors and platform for the world. I think sport is a business. It's also, everyone's passionate and tribal, but it's a business. So actually, sport as a business has a huge power. It's got a growing business. It's got $1 billion business, and you have 5 billion fans. So I think sport is a great platform that can speak to people in a different way and actually bring sustainability into culture.
That's a really good point. And talking about business, Patricia, we've been talking about policies and how policies can drive, systemic change. But of course, there's also business. It's also sustainable for businesses to make money and create impact in society, also creating jobs and new ways of looking at technology. So can you tell us a little bit about how you're working also with the UAE and the MENA region to drive technology, and what is the incentive for working in the region and in other parts of the world? How do you see policy driving your business?
Great question, Mirella. And I also want to connect to what you said previously and what Fiona, what you said. You said sport unifies people. You know what also unifies people? Food. We all like to share a good dinner with friends and family. So food is a business that causes right now 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and we can reduce that. So what we do at Orbillion is we make meat without the need to raise cattle. Real meat, independent of land, and with 90% less greenhouse gas emissions. And as you said, policy, regulatory efforts drive our ability to bring that product to all of you and to your families. And I see a unique opportunity for the GCC region, for the UAE particular, to drive food security in the region and beyond by enacting the regulatory framework and the policies that are necessary for us to really scale in the region and bring products to market rapidly, and therefore not only reduce the climate impact of the food produced, the transport of the meat produced, plus you can be an independent food producer and exporter right here in the UAE.
Thank you. Uma, over to you. We heard the MC say that about 71% of consumers believe in sustainable products and they believe that that's the choice they should make, but only about 22% actually act on that choice. Why do you think that is? Is it affordability? Is it convenience? What can you do as a business, because you're also running a business, to drive that change in consumers?
Yeah, thank you. This is the green domino question that we're all talking about. The experiences matter. When people say they want to do something, making them move from wanting to do something to actually doing something is the experience. So having those experiences that are really magical, intense, and solving something that people want to solve, I think is a really big deal. So when you talk about sport unifying people, food unifying people, that's what we're doing at Upside Foods. It's an idea that did not even exist in the world 8 years ago. The idea that you can actually bring delicious food to the table, and in this instance, meat, where you can grow meat from cows, chickens, or pigs by using their cells, and take away the downsides of meat production, which could be harm to animals, harm to the environment, harm to our human health. So when we start talking about this and communicating clearly and saying, we're going to bring the world's safest meat to the table, we want to care about our family's health, community's health, and create an incredible economic opportunity along with it, then you're creating industries, you're creating employment, you're creating experiences people can take part in. So I think that's really the green domino effect, and it takes time. In time, we'll win. We just have to continue to be able to put these magical experiences in front of people.
Great. Anna, so I'm going to come back to you. So we said energy is the foundation because, right, all of these businesses and sports, everything needs energy to drive it. If you could pinpoint, like, the most impactful technological innovation within the energy sector, what would it be, and what would be the conditions that you need to really create a ripple effect, and why not create a wave in the market?
Right now, I think one of the key technologies that can really take energy production to the next level, make it safer and more sustainable, is AI. We have worked with digital solutions, machine learning, and now AI for many, many years. We are putting people into the center and saying, how can we use this new technology for people to make better decisions? How can we remove people away from the most serious areas, keeping them safe such that everyone working for us can come safely home every day? How can we prevent incidents to happen? And for instance, failure on machinery, but detecting potential failure before it actually happens. And we're seeing how we can optimize our business, logistics, using less fuel, fewer ships to ship out all the goods we need to run our business. But I think to really be able to scale up this is all about sharing and working together across different technology companies. For instance, the technology companies that develop AI, they have a lot of experience of that. We know how to run an energy business. And if you're combining that knowledge, you are able to kind of really drive results, bottom-end results, safety results, and more sustainable results.
Great. So Aisha, when energy companies like Anas's are providing you all this clean energy, efficient energy, then how are you driving education and awareness in society and driving also behavioral change? Because it's, of course, we need to produce more energy, but we need to save, we need to recycle, consume less. So how do you bridge that gap?
We're bridging the gap through being closer to the community and to the society. And we've implemented an environment agency, Abu Dhabi, various initiatives to be closer to end users. In 2009, we introduced the Sustainable School Initiative, which basically focused on younger generations, teenagers, children at an early age at their school when introduced that program. It was recognized by the United Nations Education Program, and it was a leading engagement program on the UAE level. So basically, we encourage school students to monitor their impact on sustainability, their consumption of paper, water, energy, get it recorded on an application, and they are giving a star rating, and the star rating is in exchange rewarded through incentives. We have also online applications which are available 24 hours to all the public. They're free of charge. And they basically encourage, we have Badir, which in Arabic means do it, initiate it. And it basically focuses on promoting green activities like reducing carbon, reducing waste, recycling. So you collect points on the application, and at the end you redeem the points in a partnership across Abu Dhabi. We also have other applications. We have the citizen-signed Saham, which means in Arabic, contribute to the progress of your environment. And so basically it focuses on reporting waste, categorizing waste, put the data into the application, it gets reported to Environment Agency Abu Dhabi, we extract the data, and this data is utilized by our scientists and analysts to produce regulations, policy, and strategies to foster the implementation of more of a consumer support to protect the environment.
Great, I'm going to stop you there because I want to come back to, so we've spoken about organizations, businesses, energy producers, governments, but then we spoke about sports, but what about the athletes themselves? How can you use athletes to influence and drive change in society?
Yeah, athletes are really important and they've got a big responsibility. We were talking earlier, MIT did a study about who is engaging consumers, who are they listening to? And in the 1950s, it was politicians, it was scientists. In the 2020, athletes, 55% of consumers are listening to athletes over scientists and politicians. There's a lot in there to discuss, but it just shows how powerful athletes are, but they need to use their voice for good and they need to be educated. So at SailGP, and Morella actually is a sponsor of one of our boats at SailGP, so knows exactly what we do. We take it very seriously about how our athletes act. So we were the first sport in the world 4 years ago to have 2 trophies. So we have one for sailing, and we have one for the planet. So it's called the Impact League. And it was using behavioral science. So we know that you have to incentivize good behavior. You have to make it cool, you have to make it fun and engaging. And you have to educate people as they're doing it, because they don't know what they're doing. It's a minefield. You know, it's quite difficult sometimes to know what's more sustainable, you know, a bottle over a can, or so it's really the education piece. So we have a league where athletes get kind of audited. They get scores on their sustainability behavior, social and environmental, and there's a prize at the end. And the athletes really want to win. Morella's Danish team won in year 2, and it's as important sometimes as winning on the water. And that behavior is these athletes are then engaging our fans. They're talking to their fans about what they're doing, how they're traveling, what they're eating. And actually that makes it cool and relevant and like relatable to the fan that's just there watching a sporting event.
Thank you, Fiona. She kindly avoided saying that we came last in season 1.
And second this year, but you did win. You did win, everyone.
We did win. We had a comeback. But Patricia, so we're saying, you know, governments are doing what they need to do, energy companies are doing what they need to do, sports, athletes, influencers. So where are the barriers?
So I think for cultivated meat itself and for it to be part of that green domino effect, what we need besides the regulatory framework is really scalability, meaning having product in the market that customers can buy, having it be tasty so that consumers want to eat it. And also for us as a B2B company, we work with big food companies that bring products to the market. In general, it needs to be easy for people to have a more sustainable choice. Companies can do that by adding products like cultivated meat to their products, making the choice easy. The second important thing there is to be able to get to a price point that the customer is willing to pay. That comes with scalability, but that also comes with being able to have affordable energy costs for a manufacturing heavy company like we are. So a regional and a global scope for us to be able to scale is really important. And then secondary, really to say, how can we get that on people's plates so that it's easy, that it's tasty, that it's cost efficient for the customer to choose our product?
Thank you. So, Uma, Patricia obviously has introduced the topic of cultivated meat. Cultivated meat, that's a pretty wild idea, right? So, you know, as a consumer, and I'm sure many other people in the room are saying, isn't that sort of crazy weird? And, you know, how do you convince people that it's not crazy weird, but it's actually crazy good and something we should all buy into? And, you know, you can speak to me as if I was a 12-year-old and help me get it. So how do you do that?
Look, I would say a lot of crazy things we thought were crazy are the ones that are the most fun, but also ending up saving the world, saving lives. I mean, take a few examples. I mean, we had polio killing people. The polio vaccine comes in, it saves lives. Polio is essentially eradicated. Take about heart attacks. We used to treat people with rest and saying, hopefully it'll improve with rest. But now we open up the vessel or do a heart transplant. That saves lives. Think about flying. Flying was thought of crazy. We're all here because we flew in here for the meeting. Think about cars. Think about refrigerators and making ice in a refrigerator. All these were crazy ideas. The same thing with cultivated meat. When people recognize that you can make meat directly from animal cells, so you preserve the choice of what people love, and at the same time, you're also protecting life, not just of the animal, but people around in our community, decreasing the risk of zoonotic diseases, pandemics, antibiotic resistance. The benefits just add up. So that craziness of the idea, in order to become real, has to be coupled with some phenomenal experiences. And I'll leave you with one thing. We just had the world's most followed person. I won't name that yet, but he came and tasted the meat that we were serving. We gave him 7 different types of chicken, from kebabs to salads to, you know, empanadas. And you know what he said? I don't know what I'm doing in my life. What you're doing is amazing. I will eat this for the rest of my life, twice a day, forever, and my family. Those are the magical moments that we need to create, from going from crazy weird to crazy good.
Sounds really interesting, and we will get that name from you behind the scenes. Yeah, we're going to come back. But to wrap up, I'm going to go in order of seating now, just a quick one-liner. But just tell me, you know, we have all these ideas, whether they're crazy or super serious or traditional, etc. But then how do we measure impact? How do we measure the ripple effect? How do we know that it's actually happening, this change? So how do you measure the work that you're doing in society?
I think through different tools utilized, from applications to different initiatives, offering incentives, and make it as you said, make it fun, make it more interesting to people, and always keep measuring and managing your performance and feed into your improvement plans to make a major impact to protect the environment.
Thank you. Fiona, how do you measure impact from your Impact League?
Yeah, so we measure impact of, I suppose, looking at the data of our fans, like how are we changing our fans' mindsets, that kind of behavioral science approach. But for us at SailGP, we wanted to be a pioneer in sport and kind of prove that sustainable sport is good for business and it can be a force for good. So for me, it's other sports adopting things like the Impact League, like what ripple effect can SailGP have in the bigger sports sector? And so we're looking at that data, and sports are following what we do, so that's great.
Patricia, what does success look like for you? How will you feel like, I know it's a much newer segment, so you're sort of really at the beginning of the ripple, and hopefully it will become a wave eventually, but how do you measure that?
Look, I think the measure of the impact of cultivated meat will be in the future when we don't talk about it as cultivated meat, and it will be the number of products it's in, the number of countries it's in, the number of peoples that eat it, and that is my forward-looking impact measurement. For me, it's not a question of if, but of when that happens. It's a technology that we owe the future of our generation, the future of our planet.
Great. Anna, so I'm going to be tough on you because you're the energy producer. Okay. So decarbonization, we need you, right, for decarbonization. I come from a B2B industry, and it's not so easy for us to decarbonize because the grid's not always readily available. So how do you measure impact, and how do you help this decarbonization?
That's a good question, because for an energy company, you know, it's really about collaboration. because producing oil and gas, we have a customer base. When we're moving into electricity, and particularly when we're moving into transportation and storage of CO2, we need new customers that need to be to afford to capture the CO2 and then actually also store it permanently. So we will see a success for us is really about we are able to increase our business outside the oil and gas, having a real energy transformation also inside the company and not only in the world. But what we need is really that the world is working together. We see that to get to net zero, get a more sustainable world, countries need to work together, companies need to work together. But actually we see now is more barriers. We see more walls than bridges being built at the moment. So it's up to now for us, business leaders and state leaders, to really go back and find a way to collaborate. That's the precondition that we move to a more sustainable world.
Thank you, that's good to hear. Uma, so this ripple effect, how are you going to measure that you are actually sort of part of activating and getting that ripple effect, that green domino effect happening in society?
I think we can look back to the history of the last 8 years of the ripple effect of just the idea being seeded into the world to 200 companies being formed to regulatory approvals coming from 3 major countries. That's what we've had. So now looking at the panelists, or if I see what Aisha is looking for, she's looking to make sure there's food safety, food security. Of course, you can say we'll build one more vertical farm, but what if there is some kind of swine flu, bovine, avian flu spread? You might have to say, I don't have an option. Impact is measured by measuring adoption. So if government adopts policies to make hedges and have other supply of the same food without taking the choice away from people, that's adoption as an impact. If I look at Fiona's analogy of sports people, athletes coming out and saying, we want great food, safest food. Why do we need to have E. coli? Why do we need to have salmonella poisoning? I want to be able to adopt this and have an option for my kids. That's amazing. If Anders comes and says, look, you cannot plug a cow to make meat into an outlet, but we can plug an entire cultivated meat facility into any energy source you have, wind, solar, power. You can just literally plug in, and we can basically make a meat production carbon neutral, carbon negative. Adoption, that's what Impact's all about.
Great, so we've just about wrapped up. Thank you so much for being so inspiring. Hopefully you've inspired the audience to go out and start, whether you're an organization, a government, a sports person, or an individual. Everybody can be part of this Green Domino Impact, and also collaboration and partnership. This is a very diverse panel, but thank you for coming together and making this such an interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mirella. Great discussion, another one this afternoon. From our own actions and behaviors to the role of business in applied for a more sustainable world and economy, we are now going to turn our focus on business and the shift from linear to circular, reshaping supply chains for sustainability. That's the theme of our next discussion. Setting the stage for this talk, this dialogue, we welcome to the stage Ibrahim Al-Zubi, who's Group Chief Sustainability and ESG Officer at ADNOC, followed by a panel discussion featuring sustainability experts and business leaders. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and Your Excellency, Mr. Muawiyah Radaide, Minister of Environment of Jordan. I really appreciate your presence here for this panel. And also I appreciate the guests giving the time to stay for this important panel. I've been asked to give an introductory remarks on behalf of ADNOC. And again, I'd like to reintroduce myself. My name is Ibrahim Al-Zubi. I'm the Group Chief Sustainability and ESG Officer at ADNOC, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. It's an honor to be here and open this panel. As we gather here, we are reminded that only 7.2% of the global economy is circular. This statistic, by the way, underscores the immense importance and potential at the same time and urgency for this transformation. The transition to circular supply chains, to circular supply chain is not just an environmental imperative, but also it's a significant economic opportunity, as we always say when it comes to sustainability. And this opportunity for circular economy is estimated around $4.5 trillion. For the energy industry, our industry, the shift is particularly relevant and important. By embracing circular principles, we can reduce waste, enhance resource efficiency, and of course, lower our carbon footprint. All of this while innovation and economic growth is at the heart of our work. At ADNOC, we are actively building a low-carbon energy supply chains. We are decarbonizing our own operations, investing in renewable energy projects such as solar and wind, and other low-carbon solutions such as low-carbon hydrogen. By integrating low-carbon solutions into supply chain and circular economy, we are reducing our overall carbon footprint and contributing to global efforts to combat climate change and ensuring our energy supplies is one of the lowest carbon intensity globally. In the UAE, where sustainability is a cornerstone of our national vision, the relevance to circular economy supply chains cannot be overstated. As a leading energy producer, we have the responsibility to lead by example. By integrating circularity into our operations, we can contribute to the UAE ambitious sustainability goals, including the UAE Net Zero by 2050 strategic initiatives. At ADNOC, we are exploring ways to repurpose byproducts from our operations, such as using captured carbon for enhanced oil recovery, or converting waste materials into valuable resources, and at the end, producing an economic and business formula out of this. These initiatives not only reduce our environmental impact, but it also creates new business opportunities and strengthen our resilience against our future challenges. Resilient supply chains are the backbone of circular economy. They provide the stability and flexibility needed to transform a linear model into a sustainable, regenerative system. At ADNOC, we are focused on making our local supply chains more resilient. Through ADNOC's in-country value, our ICV program, we are committed to maximizing the value of our resources within the United Arab Emirates, supporting local businesses and ensuring that we create job opportunities. This program, by the way, ensures our supply chains in the UAE are not only sustainable, but also contribute to the socio-economic development of the UAE. We are using circular economy to look at sustainability, which is triple bottom line approach: planet, profit, people. Additionally, our Make It in the Emirates program aligns with our vision of fostering local manufacturing and innovation. These initiatives support the development of circular economy and having it at the heart by promoting the use of locally sourced materials and sustainable practices. The conversation today by the esteemed panel will explore how we can harness the multi-trillion-dollar opportunity and how we dive into strategies for integration of circular economy principles into operations, fostering collaboration across industries, and leveraging technological advancements. I would like to thank the panel in advance, and I look forward for the insights and ideas that will emerge from this panel, and I'm confident that together we can pave the way for a more circular and sustainable global economy. I wish you enjoy and fruitful panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Ibrahim Al-Zubi, Group Sustainability and ESG Officer for ADNOC Group. A really fascinating introduction to this topic. Now we're going to discuss it even further. Welcome to our next session here at Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week. I'm Georgia Tolley. I'm a journalist based right here in the UAE, and I'm delighted to be hosting this panel. We'll be discussing specifically the circular economy and how reshaping supply chains could release trillions, yes, trillions of dollars across the global value chain. It really is a fascinating conversation. I'm delighted to say I got two brilliant panelists who've joined me on stage. Her Excellency Leila Mustafa Abdulatif is Director General of Emirates Nature WWF. We also have Amadou Diallo, who is the CEO for the Middle East and Africa for DHL Global Forwarding. Thank you to both of you for joining us this afternoon. Pleasure to have you with us. Now, Your Excellency, I'm going to start with you because I wonder if you could suggest new models and what new models should be adopted to promote circularity and also decouple economic growth from resource consumption.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd also like to thank all the organizers here today for having me on stage. I think this is a very critical topic. But if you don't mind, I'd like to address it maybe in a little bit of a different way than typically we tend to look at circularity. I think it's important to really get inspired by circularity in the way that it's incorporated within nature. And I think as a nature organization as well, that's what we really try to emphasize on. So if you look at circularity in nature, if we were to leave nature alone to do its thing, essentially it regenerates itself, right? And every single process in nature has a place, it has a role, and it has a continuous cycle. So there's a lot that we can be inspired by nature when we design our own circular models within our industries. And as Emirates Nature WWF, the approach that we tend to follow is really looking at how do we work within the space of nature and with local community members to really co-design circular processes that make sense for ensuring a healthy environment and a healthy ecosystem, so that you have the benefits both from a circularity standpoint, but you're also incorporating environmental stewardship within the models that we use. So for example, we work a lot with local community members and farmers on regenerative farming, on nature-positive farming, which factors in agroecology, it factors in circular farming models and practices. So this goes down to, you know, composting, it goes into how do we recycle the water that we're using, how do we look at treated wastewater as well as a resource. If you look at nature-based solutions within the ecotourism space, for example, similar, we try to look at a circular model within that space that incorporates renewable energy, that incorporates waste models, that really integrates then both that environmental sustainability angle along with the more standard circular economy models that you would typically see within different industries.
It's a really interesting perspective, this idea that we can, of course, draw inspiration from nature itself and the way nature works. Amadou, how would you suggest both countries and, of course, corporates could actually promote circularity and decouple that economic growth from resource consumptions, which is what we see so much of at the moment?
Also, thanks also for having me here. I will not just talk on behalf of DHL, I also will talk on behalf of people that come from villages in the south. Yeah? So, you know, circularity is now something that is like, you know, very much upbeat. But me, I remember I was born over 6 years ago, you know, so, and, you know, we used to wear tires, shoes that were made out of used tires in my village, right? We used to have toys that were made out of used tomato boxes. You still can now buy suitcases that are made out of So circularity is not something new. It is not something that is economically invented now. And I think that it has been a necessity for a long time for people to have a sustainable life. So when she's talking about nature, I just recapitulate to that, you know. Now, when you look at what is happening, you know, for example, what we're doing as DHL, so every year we are collecting a lot of plastic together with Hapag-Lloyd on all the beaches across more than 17 countries with volunteers in our organization that are, for example, used here in the UAE to make the T-shirts of the delivery folks that you see when they're coming in, bringing your boxes in your platforms, with the support of a company called Degrade. Yeah? We are also equally working with a lot of organizations you know, to support enabling entrepreneurs that are working in the area of sustainability to become regional players and then global players. One example is a company that is based actually out of this place here. It's called Rebound. It was created by a young lady called Miriam Al-Mansour, you know, who we are supporting logistics-wise to be able to make sure that the platform that she's creating is a platform that will not only flourish here in the UAE, but rather contaminate many more people. Why we believe that? It's because you know, the entrepreneurship spirit that is coming out of your young minds, if not framed by policies, can create a lot of solutions that can help many people across the globe. And what we see in our organization, so we have 600,000 employees, of which 130,000 volunteer across the globe. And those volunteers, they are not volunteering because of policies or whatsoever. They're volunteering because they think that there is an impact that we can have in the world, which has helped us define a purpose in our organization, which is called connecting people and improving lives to make the world a better place. Because we are people that are coming from over 220 countries. So I think that each of us has a responsibility to make sure that anything that has been produced is not wasted but reused until the time it can be reused again, because that's the only way we will make the world a much more sustainable place for everybody.
I hear a lot there from you, Amadou, about collaboration, and I imagine, Your Excellency, you see the importance of collaboration and information sharing. How do you think that can be fostered across the value chain just to make sure that you're optimizing reuse of resources?
Well, I think having data-driven insights inform your circular economy strategy is critical, right? And ensuring that you're collaborating across different sectors also allows you to showcase how everybody has a particular role to play and they're involved in the design of that strategy. A couple of years ago, we worked on a circular proof of economy concept, or circular economy proof of concept for the F&B industry, specifically looking at plastic bottles. And we worked with 13 different global players. This included Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Starbucks, etc. And the point of the study, we actually funded a study in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi where we wanted to see how easy is it to recover these plastic bottles from the market, and what are those current barriers in the market that are preventing us from implementing real extended producer responsibility and circular economy principles within these different industries. And what we noticed is through that approach, we were able to share challenges, look at co-creating solutions collectively. We had put in place 12 different recommended policies that were actually taken up by the UAE Circular Economy Council. You had the Circle Coalition that was also formed as a result of this, which was led by the private sector, who really wanted to take the topic even further in the country. And so you could see some real systemic change. And that was as a result of government coming together, civil society, NGOs, private sector, really looking at knowledge sharing, having a strong platform to be able to monitor the effectiveness of a pilot study, of a proof of concept, to then take it to reality. So I think critical to synergize efforts across the board, but using that science-based data as a basis.
So we have this fantastic collaboration going on between all the sort of different segments of society, from government down to individuals, going through corporates. Amadou, would you suggest that we need
help from policymakers? Do we need interventions? Do we need frameworks to encourage this circular economy to develop further?
You're coming from a place where you really have to be an entrepreneur. I think that you need freedom.
Freedom.
For creativity to flourish, yeah. So, I can tell you, I can give an example. So in the UAE, it's the place where we actually opened our first electric battery warehouse worldwide, was here in the UAE, which is not far from our innovation center in DWC, Dubai World Central, it's called. There was no legal system, there was no framework, but we learned to work together with the local policy makers to define what are the standards that need to be existing for us to be able to operate. And now it is something that is replicated in China, in Mexico, in many different places, but actually it started here. And the same is for many things that we do out of our innovation center that is, that we have opened in the UAE, which we are now expanding. It is important that we have free minds trying to make up solutions that then can work together with policymakers to make policies that make sense. And when we are talking about circularity, we have many, many domains. So for example, electric batteries for vehicles, that's something that is now being created, but the policy of being able to recycle the batteries is not very, very clear. The place where you have to charge the batteries is not very, very clear. So, and we're trying to make sure that we have sustainable solutions that can be exported worldwide, but that are created here. And why is it being created here? We have roughly around 1.9 billion people living in the Middle East and Africa region. And if there are people who need electricity, it's here. If there are people who need substantial living material, it is in that region. So we are better placed to be able to invent solutions that will make sure that our people will be included in a better world than to let it be invented by people who are making policies in many different countries. We respect them all because we know that they're very creative. But I think that the people in need, when knowledgeable, then they can create a lot of solutions that can be sustainable and good for everybody else.
I only have about 2 minutes to go with both of you, and I'd like to sort of end on a quick-fire final question, if that's okay. We discovered that this circular economy has this potential to be a multi-trillion-dollar industry. Both of you move in different circles, but both of you move in quite high circles, I would suggest, with opinion formers, policymakers, people that can make a difference. Do you feel that there's an understanding within your individual circles of this potential, Your Excellency?
I think there's definitely an understanding and it's growing, but there needs to be more investment and resources towards really educating the wider group of individuals and industries that it's not that complicated to introduce. It's part of our natural environment, right? We just need to be inspired by other industry champions like we have here and see how do you implement it relatively simply within your own strategic long-term plan.
Amadou.
Yeah, so what we have tried to do here is, first of all, to create a platform for knowledge. So we are working, for example, in Dubai with Middlesex University, and Amani is an NGO that is based in Kenya, to be able to explain to all of our people through a program that is called SALAM, which stands for Sustainable Leadership Mindset. What are the business cases that you can utilize to be able to do something that is sustainable without involving losing money or investing money into things that you don't understand? And that is something that we are running across all of the region with all of our country managers for them to be able to walk the talk. The second thing that we're doing is that we are creating now a platform, a digital platform. It's called Ubuntu. The Ubuntu Academy, it will be a platform where actually people from all of our markets will be able to access the knowledge for free that we have created to actually teach our own people. And we believe that if the people are knowledgeable and they're fit and they're not hungry, then they can make loads of things.
I'm sure you'll like to join me in thanking our panelists for such a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much indeed. And of course, a huge thank you to all the organisers of this brilliant event. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Leila. Thank you, everyone, for being with us this afternoon. It's now time to welcome our last, but certainly not least, panel of the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week Summit 2025. It's titled Climate Tech and Emerging Economies, Accelerating Green Technologies from the Global South. And during this discussion, we'll explore how to accelerate the transition in emerging economies. And here's the paradox. Emerging economies represent 80% of the global population. They deploy renewable energy solutions 60% faster than developed nations. Yet, they remain largely positioned as technology recipients, solutions adopters, rather than drivers of innovation for worldwide progress. So much to discuss during our next panel. Please join me as I extend a very warm greeting to our guest, Abdullah Al-Atrash, founder and CEO of Natrify, James Mwangi, founder and CEO at Africa Climate Ventures, Nadav Steinmetz of Climate First, and Tarek Sultan of Agility. Gentlemen, please come and join me here on stage. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Another proper introduction this time. Abdullah Al-Atrash, you are the founder and CEO of Natrify. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. James Mwangi, you are the founder and CEO at Africa Climate Ventures. Equally happy to have you with us this afternoon. Nadav Steinmetz, managing partner at Climate First. Thank you for being with us. And Tarek Sultan, Vice Chairman at Agility. Many thanks for joining us this afternoon. So I'd like to kickstart this conversation with you, James, to start with. There are undoubtedly, I mentioned it in my introduction, many challenges in developing economies. But on the flip side of the coin, you think that Africa is well positioned to tap into new climate-related business opportunities. And I really like your simple but very efficient tagline at Africa Climate Ventures. You build climate unicorns, very modest indeed, on the continent. So tell us how you go about it.
So I think the logic of why we think Africa is uniquely positioned in this moment, and indeed the rest of the global south, is in part the logic of leapfrogs in general, which is that Africa is a laggard in adopting a lot of currently dominant technologies, which are the technologies of the 20th century for the most part, in everything from energy to agriculture and so on and so forth. Now, people tend to think, well, actually then it should follow that Africa will be a laggard in adopting the next wave of technologies. But as we saw with the mobile revolution, that's actually not true. And part of the reason for that is because Africa has been slow to adopt high emissions-based technologies, those are still relatively expensive. And so if you can bring a solution that's cleaner, greener, you may actually find that there is a lower green premium in Africa relative to the other solution available. And because of that, you can begin to scale up very quickly. To make this very tangible, let's take the example of fertilizer. One of my favorite investments, one of the things we think is going to take us a long way, is a business that's making organic fertilizer based on biochar. What that does is it moves fertilizer, which is one of the biggest drivers of global emissions, and turns it from a net emitting soil input to a net removing soil input. And it seems that we can actually deliver, actually we've demonstrated that we can deliver on the farm at a lower price than currently available chemical fertilizer. So that's a situation where you're delivering something that's cost competitive today. It wouldn't be cost competitive in places with more efficient agricultural value chains, but it is cost competitive in Africa from day one, and it will become more so as you scale up and as people begin to value the climate impact. And that then positions you to have already built up the scale and the potential to grow into other markets. And that's something you can repeat in everything from uses in energy, transportation, and elsewhere, where by building up that early base in a place with a big demographic, so you have the labor force, you have the natural resources, and you have the renewable energy, you can then have a robust base to take on the rest of the world.
Thank you very much, James. I'm I'm going to turn to Tarek now for my next question. Tarek, you are the chairman of Agility Global. It's a supply chain company that owns and operates many businesses across 6 continents, mostly in developing markets and in sectors notoriously difficult to decarbonize, like transportation, real estate, etc. Now, your company epitomizes the energy transition conundrum, I think, because you need to future-proof your own operations in light of the existential risk, of course, of climate change, and also seize the commercial opportunities, of course, of the transition. So tell us how your strategy reflects this.
So that's a pretty good description of the issues that we're facing as a company. I think one of our businesses is responsible for moving 6% of global trade. That's just one. We are in 5 different businesses, but gives you the scale of the magnitude of the problems or the issues that we face. So each one of our businesses has very detailed plans about how to deal with their own sustainability targets and their issues. One that I would kind of like to focus on is a company called Menzies, which is a global leader in aviation services. Their target for adoption of sustainable aviation fuel is 1% by 2030. What I want to impress upon the audience is that it's going to take us from now until 2030 to get to 1%. It gives you kind of an appreciation for how big this problem is and how big the opportunities are. We also invest quite actively in startups and technologies that we believe will play part of the energy transmission. One example is a company that makes a generator that's printed from a 3D printer. The generator uses 23 different types of fuel at the same time. So it can use green fuels, it can use hydrocarbons, and it can do so very efficiently. These sorts of technologies, we think, are going to be part of the solution that's required. So what we do is we invest in these companies and we help bring these opportunities to our global customer base. And that's kind of a way that we as a company play in this area. I would mention 2 other things that are very important. As a company that's doing business in over 100 countries, the emerging markets are going to be responsible for maybe 85% of future electricity generation requirements. If you take Abu Dhabi, for example, I've heard whispers of a project that is a 40 gigawatt project. I mean, just to put it in perspective, the nuclear facility here is, I think, is 4 gigawatts or 5 gigawatts. And they're talking about one project that would be 10 times that size. The nuclear project was a $40 or $50 billion project. So this gives you the magnitude of the opportunity and the challenges that we face. And the big issue is, how do we actually keep up with the demand that's going to be coming from the emerging markets? That's, I think, a far more important issue than how do we address it sustainably? How do we address it at all, let alone sustainably? The last thing I would say is that I think it's very important that we work with these different technology partners before they, almost before they become successful or mainstream, because otherwise you're not going to see the light of day. And we're doing that with our our programs.
Thank you very much. And once again, thank you for highlighting the energy quadrilemma we're all facing in this transition, of course. So many dilemmas, let's face it. Nadav, Climate Fast, it's an early stage climate tech investor based in London. You focus on backing what you call exceptional climate tech companies driving decarbonization on a global scale to turn them into, well, unicorns, billion-dollar businesses like James. So what processes can be implemented to facilitate effective technology transfer and knowledge, that was the theme of our discussion, of course, from developed nations to emerging markets?
First of all, thank you very much, and it's really fantastic to be here. We invest across the entire decarbonization space, and we're looking for solutions and technologies that have a significant climate impact. So to go back to what Tarek has just mentioned, I think it's important to also zoom out and think about the magnitude of the problem, but also the magnitude of the opportunity. So the magnitude of the problem is quite straightforward. We're emitting about 51 billion tons of greenhouse gases every year into the atmosphere. So we really have to focus on solutions that have significant decarbonization potential. So think about areas that are hard to abate. So the production of cement, steel, glass, ammonia, and also long-haul transportation. So really, if you're planning on taking a transatlantic flight, I have serious doubts whether this will be able to be powered by batteries because the energy density may simply not be enough. So we have to innovate. The magnitude of the opportunity at the same time is huge. We're talking about a new industrial renaissance. We estimate $150 trillion in the coming decades. I'm based in London. In Europe alone, there will be close to $2 trillion be invested in the next few years. So a very attractive investment opportunity as well. Knowledge sharing is key. We have to increase collaboration. I'm not here by myself in Abu Dhabi. We came with 5 leading companies in energy transition in order to introduce them to some of the biggest industrial and strategic players in Abu Dhabi and beyond. And these are companies that operate in long-duration energy storage, flights, industrial heat, and battery recycling, an area that I'm personally passionate about. So it's really about collaboration and tackling it with strategics, investors, and of course, founders.
Thank you, and that shows the power, of course, of ADSW to connect all the dots and help you in your endeavor, sorry. Abdullah, now you are one of those, well, rare but growing breeds of pioneers in the Global South, developing innovative sustainability solutions. So Natrify is an environmental biotech located in the MENA region, and you have developed this proprietary technology that can produce a bio-based and naturally biodegradable polymer, which sounds terribly exciting, I must admit. And you've got very high ambitions for the company since you are targeting $10 million in upfront revenues by 2025. So could you maybe share your entrepreneurial journey with us to start with, and but also be quite candid and tell us about the challenges you have faced and what you think could help you overcome those challenges going forward?
Great, thank you so much. I think the base thing to start here is how we reached this point was actually with the actual problem of the current infrastructure or something like that. When you look at how the products are designed or the sustainable solutions are designed around the plastic issue, is we have this demonic representation of plastics as this enemy and this very bad product that no one, that we should all move away from. And because of that, when you look at all of the solutions that existed or that kind of arise in the market, they always address the sustainability issue. And they don't look at the current infrastructures, the billions of dollars infrastructures that has been investment, the trillion-dollar industry that's contributing to so many economies. And that's actually where we started here from. It's that this is a very efficient product. This is a product that has helped so much of the current logistics that we were able to do. This is a very lightweighted product. It's a very cost-effective product here. So what's the core issue here? It's only the raw material. How this product was made was the issue, not the product itself. And we started from this point. Okay, so how can we produce the same efficient product here, the same cost efficiency side, but kind of use a more sustainable raw material side that takes into consideration the individual economies that operate here. So what's available, what's abundant in these kind of countries and all of these areas. And that's how we started addressing the issue, which is how can we create the most sustainable product that can share the same selling price as plastics. And I would say that we were able to successfully do so by just trying to produce this kind of cost-efficient side here. And I think here the base challenge was always, just like you said here, I think we're well positioned because of the side of us being laggers, but that also means that we're laggers when it comes to the technology infrastructure that enables you to produce any new technology, and that transcends in the biotech space. Because essentially we started from Egypt, where the biotech infrastructure is non-existent at all. We have faced a lot of issues over there. In some cases, we had to create our own infrastructures. And I think policy side was also an issue. Not on, I don't believe in policy as a mean to drive products, but as a mean to support existing solutions that happen here. So the base thing here, if we wanted to kind of source materials for our genetic modification process or for our R&D, it was very hard to do so here. So I think it was a very fulfilling journey to do so. And I think right now, whether it's some place like UAE or Saudi or stuff like that, we're very well positioned. And even, by the way, in Kenya and Nigeria, they have very good infrastructures for a lot of technologies to emerge. I think it's a mix between policy and kind of base infrastructures, and then companies go and kind of develop on into those infrastructures.
Okay, so a couple more questions before we wrap up. Tarek, you alluded to the huge commercial opportunity, of course, of the transition. But we may not have touched upon another aspect of the benefits under transition. And it's, well, this demographic crisis we're seeing currently in developing nations is clearly not the case in the global south. And I guess my next question is for you, James. Africa, the youngest continent, of course, in the world, and this stat that is well known, but by 2050, 1 in 4 people on the planet will be African. Okay, so clearly an opportunity, but also a challenge to a certain extent, because you have to provide opportunities to that youth, okay? So tell us about the potential of climate tech and of the transition to address what could become a societal problem, but it's also this great opportunity.
Yes, well, and this is where we actually got started, was the question of how do you attract capital to Africa, which has historically not been a particularly attractive space, hasn't been necessarily the most competitive destination for capital. And our argument was, actually climate tech presents that opportunity because Africa's combination of demographic assets, which you just talked about, geography and natural resources, some of that is quite obvious, and just the untapped renewable energy, means that for some of these newer sectors where there isn't that established effect, right? If you're trying to get into the internal combustion engine automotive industry, you can't compete with the big established hubs that already exist. But actually, if you're looking at new manufacturing, those advantages are less pronounced, and some of the advantages of proximity, cheaper energy in the long term, if we can get investment into the energy systems, and that readily available labor force really come to the fore. So the way I shorten it is there's a very simplistic way of thinking about the way that big chunks of the world have moved out of poverty. You could simplify China's journey as being driven by turning its rural peasant farmer population into the world's industrial workforce. You could similarly oversimplify India's journey as being one of repeating the same trick but creating the world's knowledge workforce in tech, in business process outsourcing, and so on. As we think about the new industrial sectors that need to be created in climate tech and in other parts of everything from carbon removal to new forms of production, you could argue Africa's pathway is in building the world's climate workforce. And that requires a new set of skills. It requires training people already who don't have a vested interest in the previous models to immediately embrace new ways of doing things. And we're finding real uptake and real excitement among African youth for the idea that they are not just climate victims, which tends to be the story that is told in the media, but they're actually the critical workforce that is needed to save the world from the climate crisis.
Workforce leapfrogging to a certain extent.
Indeed.
Africa is obviously famous for that. Tarek, now, very quickly, the role of technology in supply chains in particular. There was a lot of excitement 10, 15 years ago about blockchain, for instance. We're seeing a lot of excitement around AI. Are you as excited as everyone else about it?
Well, don't get me started on blockchain. Blockchain to me is anytime the millennials have a problem that they can't solve, they say hit it with the blockchain. That's to me what blockchain.
That was the talk at the time.
Okay, all right. But sorry, the second part of the question was?
AI.
AI. So AI is, I mean, the short answer to that is AI is going to be a disaster for the climate agenda in the initial phases. I mean, if you look at the requirements, for example, for a data center that uses, that's leveraging AI, that data center on a per capita basis, you're going to need 10 times the amount of electricity that you would need consume in a normal data center. So that's probably what Abu Dhabi is gearing up for. That initial kind of scaling up for artificial intelligence is going to be something that's somehow damaging to the environment. It's an opportunity, but it's going to be damaging to the environment because currently some of that technology will come from non-green sources. That's just the reality of the situation. I know a few vendors that have opened up some new facilities in South Africa, and their only choice was to get diesel generators to power their data centers. And they weren't even able to get some of the more efficient diesel generators. They had to go to a second and third tier because demand is so high for electricity production. So the short run is bad, but the long run, obviously, AI will play a major role in helping address environmental problems. We're investing in a lot of companies that are using AI in the medical field. I'll give you one example, and you can kind of imagine what it would mean for sustainability. A company that can, from an eye selfie, can do a COVID test, can do an EKG, can actually do your blood pressure, pulse O2. All of that's done without any piece of equipment other than your iPhone. That's using AI. So you imagine the amount of carbon that you've saved in actually patients being transported, equipment being powered, just done from your iPhone.
Thank you very much for that, Tarek. We need to wrap up. But before we go, I'd like to ask you all maybe to define your call to action or your message to this audience in relation to our theme, which is about empowering the Global South to become technology innovators and climate tech, of course, innovators. Starting with you, maybe.
Okay, I think the base here is rethinking how our products are designed, because I think, Tarek, you have literally summarized the whole idea of how we look at infrastructures here. Everything, if we're moving so fast with everything that's being done, and we have existing infrastructures that has already had billions of dollars invested in them and have a lot of money already circulating around here, if the climate action or the climate technology want to keep up with all of this, we need to redefine how we're looking at our products and how we're designing the products from the beginning. They should utilize the existing infrastructures, not try or integrate with them, not try and go and create newer infrastructures, investing billions more in dollars, and we won't be able to keep up with the speed of the newer countries. So let's think about how we can use what we have today and make it just greener.
That's fair enough. Abdullah, thank you very much. James?
I think that there's a huge opportunity in asking how do we, picking up on a point earlier, how do we rethink? We live in a world where, historically energy was easy to move and knowledge, expertise was difficult to move. And so we move energy to current industrial hubs. I think as we embrace more and more renewable energy, energy becomes hard to move, but other ingredients become easier to shift, such as knowledge and expertise in the case of AI. And it begs the question, how do we take the Global South, which is really the tropical belt, which really has the best renewable energy resources, and think about how do we do more there as a way to ease the transition? Take the data center example and say, yes, we're going to see this huge surge in energy demand. I'm sitting in a country, Kenya, with 4 gigawatts of power on our grid, but 10 gigawatts of proven geothermal untapped, another couple of 100 gigawatts of solar and untapped wind, which is just waiting for someone to say, well, we can do these things that are not location sensitive there, much greener and cleaner, without a single new innovation other than where we choose to do these things. And I think that's the big opportunity in how we allocate capital, is ask logically, where is it that we need to solve the fewest big technical problems in order to undertake a green transition, and begin to invest in that direction.
And your point obviously very much echoes what you shared with us, Abdullah, earlier. Nadav?
For me, it's about accelerating the rate of innovation, which is about taking big risks, which is very easy to say, but hard to do. So it's about building the mechanisms in private markets, I think specifically, that allows both founders and investors to take big risks early on. I'll share with you our motto at Climate First, which we have on the walls in every office of our firm, which says, think big, act fast, get things done.
Thank you. Very straight to the point. Tarek?
Yeah, I would say we need to take the politics out of this discussion and focus on the practical paradigm of actually having to address what's coming in the emerging markets. Emerging markets are empowered because that's where the demand is going to be coming from. Emerging markets are empowered because that's where the solutions are going to be deployed. So, we have to think and come to terms with how we're going to do that. Are we going to do that using old polluting technologies, or are we going to do that with new paradigms? And I think whether we like it or not, the emerging markets are going to be where the action is.
Absolutely, and I can feel it actually. I'm really glad we finished today with this panel because I'm feeling energized by the potential of the Global South. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today and for your brilliant thoughts and for sharing them with us. Thank you. Thank you. What a fantastic way to end day 2 of Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week Summit 2025, our last day, of course. As the anchor event of Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, the summit's objective is to serve as a nexus, a powerful platform for engaging, inclusive and thought-provoking discussions to supercharge progress. And I'm sure that you'll agree that all the ideas, the examples and innovations we explored throughout the summit really gave us increased clarity on the requirements and progress towards a more sustainable, climate-friendly future. And our hope is that you feel confident and inspired to pursue and accelerate this progress. So thank you very much, I guess, for joining us today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. We were truly honored to have you with us during this summit at the Nexus of Next. That's it from us, but the conversations, of course, continue. You will pursue them here during the rest of the week and all the exciting events that will be happening here with many takeaways that you will be able to take home with you. And here on stage tomorrow, the Green Hydrogen Summit. Do not miss it. Esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention once again and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.